Hello everyone, I am the Midnight Teller and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel also. Where are you from and what time are you watching now? Get comfortable and relax. I never expected much from a cheap bungalow. My fiancée Megan and I had been hunting for a place that we could afford while saving up for the wedding. We found this little spot online and the photos made it look cozy. I liked the wooden floors and the small porch that faced a quiet street. We moved in without much hesitation right away. I noticed the long hallway at the back near our bedroom. It felt strange, the previous tenant said. Everything was fine, though they mentioned it could get drafty at night. They never brought up anything about kids or strange noises that changed for me. The first week we stayed there. On the third night around 2 in the morning, I woke up to this muffled sound. At first I thought it was someone outside, maybe a neighbor talking. But then I heard what sounded like a child humming a tune. It was soft but clear enough that I could pick up a melody. It had a rhythm, but I couldn't place it. Megan was asleep beside me, so I got out of bed slowly. The hallway light was off and it was just me. The darkness and that humming. I opened our bedroom door a crack and listened. The sound was definitely coming from the far end of the hall. I felt a chill run down my arms. My heart pounded in my chest for a moment. I thought maybe a family had moved in next door, but the walls here weren't that thin and the humming sounded too close. I stepped out and flipped on the hallway light. The humming stopped. I stood there staring at the far end of the corridor. It led to a small storage area that we hadn't really used yet. I took a few careful steps forward. My bare feet were cold on the wooden floor. I felt a slight breeze along my shoulders. The air in the hallway felt different, heavier. I reached the end, opened the storage door and peered inside. Nothing. No boxes had been moved. No signs of anyone hiding in there. I even tapped on the walls to see if there was some weird vent or pipe. Everything was solid. I tried to breathe normally, but I felt uneasy. I went back to bed, telling myself it was probably just some odd echo from outside. The next morning, I didn't mention it to Megan. I hoped it was a fluke. We had a normal day. We both worked, grabbed dinner on the way home, and settled in for the night around midnight. Megan nodded off while reading. I was still awake, flipping through my phone. I heard the sound again, the same humming, distant but unmistakable. I froze for a second. My pulse sped up. I turned off my phone screen so I could focus. The melody was a bit louder this time, like it was coming closer to our bedroom door. I gently shook Megan's shoulder. She mumbled something about being tired and rolled over, half awake. Whispered, "Do you hear that?" She listened for a moment. The humming had stopped. Megan shrugged and said she didn't hear anything. I felt a bit embarrassed, like I was making it up. But I knew what I heard. I mumbled some excuse about it being late. And we both went to sleep. My mind wouldn't let it go. Though the next day I called the previous tenant, Ethan, and asked him a few things. I tried not to sound paranoid, but I hinted that we were hearing odd noises at night. He told me that he and his girlfriend never had kids and never heard anything like that. He said the place was quiet, almost too quiet sometimes, before he hung up. He joked that maybe I was just on edge about the wedding. I forced a laugh and thanked him, but inside I was tense. A few nights passed without incident. I started to relax. Then around the weekend, the humming came back. This time I was awake, and Megan was in the kitchen. I was in the living room scrolling through a streaming service for a movie. It was about 1100 p.m. That slow tune started drifting out from the hallway again. I stood up, feeling my legs go stiff. I glanced at Megan, who had stopped moving. She looked in my direction. direction, eyes wide. "Is that what you've been talking about?" she asked. I nodded, my throat dry. We both crept toward the hallway. I flicked the switch, flooding the corridor with light. The humming continued for about 2 more seconds, then cut off abruptly. We stood at the entrance, staring into that narrow space. It was just 10 or 12 feet of floor leading to the storage area. "Nothing seemed out of place," Megan whispered. "It sounds like a kid singing, right?" I nodded. She swallowed hard and said, "But there aren't any kids next door." The neighbor on one side was an older couple, on the other side was a single guy who worked late shifts. No children at all. I didn't know how to explain it. We decided to check the storage room together. It was the same scene, empty boxes, some spare chairs, nothing out of place. The air was cold, though I noticed goosebumps on Megan's arms and I felt them on mine too. That weekend, we tried to focus on normal stuff. We cooked. We watched a dumb reality show. We went grocery shopping at night, though I found myself avoiding the hallway. I closed the bedroom door before turning off the lights, as if that would keep the sound out. I kept telling Megan I was probably overreacting, but she admitted she felt spooked too. We double-checked the windows to ensure they were locked. Megan even went outside with a flashlight to see if there was some sort of vent or pipe that might cause humming. She came back empty-handed. Then one night around 3 in the morning, I woke up. Suddenly, I didn't hear anything at first, but I felt a strange heaviness in the air. My heart was racing. I glanced at the bedroom door. A faint glow came from under it. Like the hallway light was on, but I knew for a fact we had turned off every light before sleeping. My stomach twisted. I slipped out of bed, as quietly as I could. Megan was still asleep, or at least she appeared to be. I stepped toward the door. My palms were damp and I could feel my forehead getting sweaty. I reached for the door handle and paused. That humming started again right on the other side. It was so close I could hear the slight rasp in the voice. It rose and fell in a simple tune. I felt a surge of adrenaline. My fingers shook on the handle. I turned the knob and opened the door a few inches. The hallway light was on. Just as I suspected, the humming was right in front of me. But I couldn't see who or what was making it. I couldn't see anything at first. I opened the door wider, stepping out. I had the urge to call out, but I stayed silent. Then at the far end of the hallway, I saw a shape. It was tall, very tall, almost stretching to the ceiling. It stood in front of the closed storage door facing me. There was no child there. It was just that single shape, but it looked like it had 2 outlines, or silhouettes, as if it was trying to mimic more than one figure. My chest tightened. The shape twitched like it was adjusting its posture. The humming continued coming from that shape. I tried to breathe normally, but I felt like I was choking on air. My mind raced with confusion. It didn't look human. It was 2 thin arms, too long, and it had this slight sway as if it was off balance. I took a step back and the humming stopped. The silence was worse. I could feel every beat of my heart pounding in my ears. Suddenly, the shape made a shifting motion, and it looked like it extended one arm or limb toward the light switch. The hallway light flickered, and for a split second I saw more details: pale, almost gray skin, long fingers, and a height that nearly touched the top of the doorframe. I gasped and stumbled backward into the bedroom. I slammed the door shut and locked it. I stood there shaking. Megan woke up, startled by the noise. She asked what was going on. My voice came out in a whisper. "There's something in the hallway." She looked at me like I was crazy, but then she saw my face and realized I was serious. We stood there, our ears straining. We heard the floor creak outside the door, a soft dragging sound like something brushing against the walls. Then a faint hum started again right outside our bedroom. Megan grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. Her breathing was fast. I didn't know what to do. I looked around for something to use as a weapon, but we only had random stuff like a small lamp and a few pillows. Nothing that made me feel safer. The humming stopped again, and we heard the sounds fade down the hallway. It moved away back toward the storage area. I was too scared to open the door. Megan and I sat on the bed, holding hands, every muscle in my body tight. Eventually, the house fell silent. No footsteps, no humming, no dragging. I checked the time on my phone. It was almost 4:00 a.m. By then, we didn't sleep the rest of the night. In the morning, the hallway looked completely normal. The light was off, just as we had left it the night before. I asked Megan if she saw anything after I slammed the door, and she said she only caught a glimpse of the light flickering. She heard the sounds, though. She believed me now. Neither of us had an easy time focusing on work that day. On my lunch break, I tried to do some research online. I searched for local legends or weird stories about that neighborhood. I found nothing that matched. It was all random stuff, nothing that explained a tall figure mimicking childlike humming. That night, we tried something different. We left the hallway light on intentionally and the bedroom door open a crack. We wanted to see if we could spot that thing before it reached our door. We lay in bed, our nerves on edge, eyes fixed on the slice of hallway. We could see hours went by. Nothing happened. We both started to drift off, thinking maybe it wouldn't come. Then at around 2:30 in the morning, the humming started again, but this time from behind the storage room door. It sounded muffled, like it was coming through the wood. Megan looked at me and whispered, "It's in the storage area." I grabbed my phone to use its flashlight. We walked slowly down the hallway, staying close to the wall. My legs felt weak, like they might give out under me at any second. The humming was steady. The same eerie tune. I put my hand on the storage room doorknob. Megan stood behind me, clutching the back of my shirt. I forced myself to turn the knob. The door swung open. The flashlight beam cut through the darkness inside. For a moment, I thought I saw a shape crouched in the far corner. Then the humming stopped. The shape moved so quickly it was like a blur, slipping behind some boxes. My heart hammered in my chest. I took a cautious step into the room. The smell was damp, like old cardboard. I shone the light around, but I didn't see that tall figure anymore. I only saw stacks of boxes and a small window near the ceiling. We backed out and shut the door. Megan's breathing was uneven, and I could feel myself shaking. I called out, "Who's there?" Silence. It felt like the house itself was holding its breath. Then one of the boxes shifted inside the room, and we heard a rustling sound. We didn't wait to see more. We turned and headed back to our bedroom, shutting the door firmly. My ears were ringing. I put a chair under the doorknob to block it. We lay awake, eyes open, until morning light came through the curtains. After that, Megan asked me if we could break the lease. She didn't want to spend another night there. I felt the same way. We started looking for a different place immediately. While we searched, we stayed at the bungalow but kept every light on at night. We slept with the TV on in the bedroom. We even put a heavy dresser in front of the storage room door. We wanted to make it harder for anything to get in or out. Every night we heard the floor creak or the walls shift. Sometimes we caught faint bits of that humming in the distance, but it didn't get as close to our bedroom door again. I suspected it was lurking at the far end of the hallway, waiting. A few days later, we managed to get a short-term rental on the other side of town. We told the landlord we had a family emergency and needed to move. He wasn't happy, but we made up some excuse and paid a fee to break the lease early. On our final night, we took our remaining boxes and loaded them into the car. The place felt darker than usual, like the light bulbs weren't as bright. Megan hurried with her last suitcase while I double-checked the closets. The hallway felt so cold I half expected to see that shape one more time. My heart beat in my ears. as I looked toward the storage door now blocked by the dresser. Nothing happened, but I still felt an oppressive presence in the air. We locked the door for the last time as I stood. Outside in the driveway with my car trunk full of our stuff, I thought I heard that humming again and faintly coming through the walls of the bungalow. I didn't stick around to find out. I got in the car, started the engine, and drove off with Megan beside me. We haven't gone back. I don't plan to. We never saw any news stories about the place, and no one else ever mentioned anything similar. For all I know, that tall figure might still be in there humming in the dark, waiting in that back corridor for someone else to move in. I don't have an explanation. I only know what we heard and what we saw. That's enough for me to stay away, and that's all I can really say about it. I got home around 900 at night, feeling exhausted from another long shift. My entire body felt worn out. I turned my key in the lock, stepped inside, and flipped on the lights in the hallway. My apartment looked normal at first. I kicked off my shoes and tossed my keys on the small table by the door. Then I walked into the kitchen. I stopped as soon as I saw the mess. Every cabinet door stood wide open. Broken plates and shattered glasses covered the floor. Sharp pieces of porcelain and glass glinted under the overhead light. I froze, my pulse quickened, and a hot flush went up my neck. I remember standing there holding my breath, not sure if I was in danger or if there was someone still inside. I took a slow step forward, avoiding the shards on the floor. I listened. The apartment was silent. I looked around for any sign of forced entry. The windows were intact. I walked to the kitchen window, tugged on it. It was locked. I went to the front door and checked it, still locked. No scratches around the lock, nothing strange about the hand. It felt impossible, but there. It was a destroyed kitchen with no sign of how anyone got in or out. I flicked on more lights and moved around carefully. Stepping over broken dishes, the living room looked untouched. The couch and coffee table sat where they always did, no cushions out of place, no random items on the floor. I glanced down the hallway toward my bedroom. The door stood open and the lights were off. I flicked on the hallway light and peeked inside my room. Nothing seemed disturbed there. My comforter lay where I left it. The lamp on the nightstand stood upright. My dresser drawers were closed. I felt some relief because I expected more chaos still. The uneasy feeling in my stomach stayed. I returned to the kitchen, unsure of what to do next. My hands were shaking. I reached for my phone to call the police. My breathing felt uneven, and my shoulders were tense. I dialed 911 and told them someone had broken in and trashed my kitchen. I paced in a small circle until they arrived. The officer showed up about 15 minutes later. They knocked on my door, announced themselves, and stepped inside. One officer asked me to wait in the living room while they checked the kitchen and walked through the other rooms. I stood by the couch, arms crossed over my chest. My stomach churned. I could still see the open cabinets from where I stood. I listened to the officer's steps on the floor crunching on the broken pieces of ceramic and glass. They didn't say much as they moved around. When they finished, one of them nodded at me and I followed them back into the kitchen area. They asked if anything was missing. I looked around. My microwave was where it belonged. My coffee maker was still on the counter. Pots and pans seemed to be in the same general area, though some had fallen out of the cabinets. My silverware drawer was closed. I opened it and saw nothing out of place. The officer checked my fridge, my pantry, and my other cabinets. The doors were damaged from being flung open with force, but I didn't see any obvious theft. The police asked if I kept anything valuable in the kitchen. I shook my head. I told them I didn't keep money or jewelry in there. They walked me through the rest of the apartment shining flashlights into corners and behind doors, but everything else looked normal. They took pictures of the scene in the kitchen, they checked my locks, peered out the windows. One officer looked for footprints or scuff marks on the floor. He didn't see any. They asked if anyone else had keys. I mentioned my landlord had a spare, but I doubted he would do something like this. There was no reason for him to destroy my plates and glasses. The police also asked if I had security cameras or if the building had any in the hallway. I said I didn't, and I wasn't sure about the building security footage. They told me to contact the building manager in the morning. Eventually, they said they couldn't find signs of forced entry or any evidence of a typical burglary. They suggested I file a report in case I discovered something missing later. I sat at my small dining table filling out forms and giving my statement. My legs felt restless, my fingers tapped the table I kept. Thinking about how silent the apartment had been when I walked in and the officers wrapped up, gave me a case number and left. They said to call if I noticed anything else suspicious after they left. I stayed there staring at my ruined kitchen. It felt eerie. I didn't hear neighbors in the hallway or any cars outside. It was dead quiet. I pulled on a pair of gloves from under the sink and grabbed a broom to sweep up the broken pieces as I swept. I thought about how every cabinet door was wide open. It felt deliberate, not random. I still didn't understand how someone could get in without breaking anything. The thought of something invisible crossed my mind, but I shook it off. It sounded ridiculous still. The image of those doors flung open stuck with me. I felt a knot of tension in my chest as I cleaned. I dumped the shattered dishes into a heavy-duty trash bag. My hands were sweaty and my grip on the broom felt slippery occasionally. I glanced over my shoulder expecting to see something. Nothing appeared. The air felt stale. I opened a window even though I was nervous about leaving it unlocked. I needed some fresh air. My head ached from the stress. I finished cleaning as best as I could and decided to try to sleep in my bedroom. I locked all the windows and doors, then I stood in the hallway for a moment listening. I heard a faint hum from the fridge. That was it. I closed my bedroom door, turned on the lamp, and changed out of my work clothes. My shirt smelled like sweat. I tossed it in the hamper and put on a clean t-shirt. I felt too anxious to go straight to bed, so I sat on the edge of the mattress, phone in hand. I considered calling a friend, but it was late. I sat there scrolling through messages, but no one had texted me recently. My heart rate felt a little fast. I was shaky too, but I tried to breathe slowly. I realized my back was sore from being tense. I forced myself to lie down. My thoughts raced. I kept picturing those open cabinets. It didn't make sense. Maybe I forgot to lock something. But then again, the police said there was no sign of forced entry. I felt unsettled. After a few minutes, I got up and checked the kitchen one more time. The trash bag sat against the wall, filled with broken pieces of ceramic and glass. The cabinets were still open, but there was nothing left inside them that could fall out. I felt a slight draft, like a breeze against my arms. The window was closed. Though I walked around trying to find the source of the draft, but I didn't see anything. I decided it was my nerves playing tricks on me. So I went back to bed. I slept for maybe 3 hours. I woke up in the middle of the night with a start. My eyes opened and I didn't know why. The room was dark except for the glow of the streetlight through the blinds. I listened. I heard a faint tap, like something shifting in another room. It was quiet, just a soft noise. I pulled the covers aside and stood up. My chest felt tight and my breathing got heavier. I grabbed my phone and used its flashlight feature as I walked toward the bedroom door. I kept thinking about intruders or some presence I couldn't see. When I reached the kitchen, the light was still off. I swept the phone's flashlight across the counters. Everything looked the same as before. The trash bag was still there. The cabinet doors were open. I didn't see any new damage. The living room was dark and silent too. I turned to go back to bed. That's when I heard another subtle clicking sound. It came from the hallway behind me. I shone my phone's light in that direction. There was nothing there. I felt the hairs on my arms stand up. My stomach cramped with unease. I stayed still for a few seconds waiting, but the noise didn't return. My mouth felt dry and I swallowed hard. I went back to bed and tried to ignore the heavy feeling in my chest. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. My body felt stiff and my neck was sore. I got dressed and went straight to the building manager's office. I told him what had happened. He shook his head. He said no one reported strange activity the night before, and the building security cameras in the lobby and corridors didn't capture anyone entering my apartment. He said I could file a request for new locks, but that was about all he could do. I walked away from his office feeling frustrated. It sounded like a dead end. I returned to my apartment. I stood in the hallway looking at my front door. Remembering the feeling from the night before, I went inside, left my shoes at the door, and glanced toward the kitchen. It looked the same as I left it. Only now there was something light coming through the window. I decided to grab some cardboard boxes and pack the rest of my plates and glasses, the ones that weren't broken. I didn't want to leave them out in the open. I spent the next hour carefully placing kitchen items into boxes and stacking them in a corner of my living room. I took down a few of the cabinet doors too, because some were hanging off their hinges. My hands felt dusty and grimy from handling the old hinges. I kept wiping them on a rag. Around noon, I made myself a quick sandwich with the last plate I had left out. I stood at the kitchen counter chewing and thinking about how to handle this situation. I wanted to install my own camera, or at least some kind of motion detector. But it all felt strange. I told myself I was being paranoid. I washed my plate in the sink, dried it, and put it away in the box. Then I decided to check the rest of the apartment again. I opened closet doors and looked for any hidden spaces. I checked the bathroom cabinet. I found nothing unusual. Everything seemed fine except for my destroyed kitchen. I spent the afternoon trying to focus on normal tasks. I did laundry in the shared laundry room down the hall. The hum of the machines felt comforting. There were other tenants around, coming in and out. No one seemed to know about what happened in my place. I didn't bring it up. I felt uncomfortable talking about it with strangers. When my laundry finished, I carried it back to my apartment in a hamper. The hallway was quiet. I noticed the overhead lights flickering a bit, but I told myself it was probably an electrical issue. Nothing more inside. I put my clothes away and glanced at the kitchen. My stomach clenched again. I decided to sweep the floor once more to get rid of any small shards I might have missed as I swept. I thought about sleeping in a hotel that night. I felt uneasy staying in this apartment. The idea of something invisible messing around in my kitchen wrapped me. I couldn't get it out of my head, but I also wanted to face it. I didn't want to run away from my own home that evening. I turned on all the lights in the apartment and made a simple dinner. I ate in the living room, sitting on the couch with the TV on. I needed some noise. The silence bothered me. Around 900, I decided to get ready for bed. I walked into the kitchen to shut the light off. I paused. The air felt colder there. My forearms broke out in goosebumps. I stood by the light switch, breathing slowly, trying to see if the temperature actually dropped or if it was just in my head. I exhaled and saw no vapor in the air, so it wasn't freezing. It was just a slight chill still. It made me uncomfortable. I left the kitchen light on. I didn't want to stand in the dark. I closed my bedroom door and sat on my bed. My phone showed a new message from a coworker asking if I could cover a shift tomorrow. I stared at it, considering if I should accept. Maybe it would help me avoid being in the apartment. I sent a quick reply saying yes, I'd come in early. I felt a hint of relief, as if keeping busy would help me forget then. I turned off the lamp and lay down on my back. I could hear my own heartbeat against the pillow. I tried to stay calm. I fell asleep around midnight. I woke up a few hours later. Heart pounding, my arms felt clammy and my mouth was dry. I sat up and grabbed my phone, clicking the screen to see the time. It was almost 3 in the morning. I listened for sounds outside the bedroom door. Nothing. I opened the door anyway and crept into the hallway. I could smell something faint, like an electric burn. I followed it to the kitchen. The ceiling light was flickering. The bulb popped and went out, leaving me standing in near darkness. My breath caught in my throat. I felt a surge of fear hit my legs, making them tense. I turned on my phone, flashlight again, shining it over the counter and the boxes of dishes in the living room. Everything looked normal, but the smell was still there. It reminded me of overheated wires or a short circuit. I flipped the light switch on and off, but the bulb stayed dead. I backed away, feeling my pulse throb in my temples. The short bursts of fear drained me. I just wanted this to stop. My body was tired and my mind kept racing. I went back to my bedroom, shut the door, and forced myself to lie down. I closed my eyes, hoping I could drift off again. My muscles felt tense, but I tried to breathe through it. Eventually, I dozed off, clinging to the thought that I'd be out of the apartment soon for work. That was how things stayed for a while every night. I felt uneasy. Some nights I heard soft knocks in the walls or faint clicks in the kitchen. Other nights I slept without interruption but woke up tired. I never caught any sign of an intruder. I found no footprints, no real evidence. The destroyed dishes were the only solid proof of something strange. The police had no answers. My building manager insisted. There was no record of anyone entering. I kept living there, dreading the nights. I still don't know who or what destroyed my kitchen that night. I just know it happened, and nobody can explain how I jolted awake to total darkness, my heart pounding like it was trying to break through my chest. There was a faint creak at the far end of the living room, but the silence felt heavier than that small sound. I didn't know what time it was, but I sensed it was deep in the night. My phone lay on the coffee table. The TV was off. Everything was still except for my pulse and the slight rustle of leaves against the window. Then I remembered the silhouette. I had arrived at my brother's place 2 nights earlier. He lives in a quiet neighborhood where most people wave at each other during morning jogs and keep their lawns tidy. His house is a small single-story with a neat yard. The living room faces the street and there's a large window that looks out onto the front porch. I was supposed to stay there for a few days while he and his wife took a short trip. They have no kids, just a dog, but he went with them. They said it would be easy. They left a few groceries in the fridge, told me where the spare key was, and made sure I was comfortable. The first day was uneventful. I watched TV, ordered takeout, and walked around the neighborhood in the afternoon. I didn't see many people out. Maybe 1 or 2 neighbors waved from across the street. But that was it. Everything felt calm by 10 at night. I locked the doors, made sure the windows were closed, and headed to my brother's guest room. I had trouble sleeping that first night, maybe because the house was unfamiliar, or maybe I was just restless. Around midnight, I got up to get some water from the kitchen while I was on my way back to bed. I passed by the living room. The street lamp outside cast a warm glow through the window. That was when I first noticed it, a shape standing on the other side of the glass. It was only visible against the light from the street lamp. I froze, gripping my glass of water so hard I almost dropped it. I couldn't see any features, just a dark outline. It looked like a person wearing a hood or a large jacket. But I couldn't be sure. My heart pounded in my chest. I felt my skin go cold and the hairs on my arms stand up. I reached for the living room light switch on the wall, my hand shaking the moment I flicked it on. The shape vanished. I stared out the window, seeing nothing. Nothing but the dimly lit porch in the street. Beyond, there was no movement, no figure. I turned the light off, then on again. Nothing. The porch was empty. I went straight to the front door, checking to make sure it was locked. It was then I checked the windows, turning on the porch light as well. I looked outside. No one was there. I felt my heart rate slowly return to normal. But I was still on edge. I told myself it must have been, the trick of the light, maybe a weird shadow from the trees. I tried to brush it off, but that didn't stop me from checking around the house to more times before I finally forced myself back to bed the next morning. I shrugged it off as a half-awake hallucination. I made some coffee, looked outside, and saw that everything was normal. The sun was bright, the grass in the yard looked the same. The street was empty except for a neighbor walking his dog. I spent the day running a few errands. I picked up more groceries, folded some laundry my brother had left in the dryer, and spent a few hours playing video games. By evening, I felt relaxed again. I cooked a simple dinner, watched a show, and texted my brother to let him know everything was fine. Around midnight, I turned off the TV and prepared to go to bed. While I was in the kitchen rinsing my plate, I felt a slight unease. I tried to ignore it, but it gnawed at me. I wandered into the living room again, letting the darkness settle through the big window. I saw the glow of the street lamp outside, and there it was again. This time the figure was standing in the exact same spot as before, completely still. No movement, no sound. I couldn't see a face or any details. It was just a dark outline, like a cutout against the background. My stomach lurched. I felt sweat trickle down my back. I stepped closer to the window, my breathing shallow. I thought about turning the light on again, but I hesitated instead. I stood there trying to see if the figure would move. My feet felt rooted to the floor after what felt like a full minute. I reached for my phone in my pocket. I pressed the side button to wake it up, letting the screen cast a soft glow inside the room. The light from my phone was weak, but the silhouette outside twitched. It jerked slightly, then slid out of view, disappearing into the darkness. I reached for the lamp on the side table. I turned it on, flooding the living room with a dim glow. Outside there was nothing. My porch light was off, so I couldn't see much. But if someone had been on the porch, they were gone now. I felt my heart slam in my chest. My first thought was to call the police, but then I worried they would think I was imagining things. Maybe it was just a prowler, or maybe it was someone lost or confused. But why would they show up 2 nights in a row? I decided to double-check every lock in the house. All the windows were secure, the back door was locked, and the front door was bolted shut. I kept the lamp on when I finally went to the guest room. I left the hall light on too, just for reassurance. My mind raced with thoughts about who or what this figure could be. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured that shape standing there, staring at me. I forced myself to think about something else, the errands I needed to do the next day or the TV shows I wanted to watch. Still, I could feel the tension in my body, like my muscles wouldn't relax. I fell asleep but woke up again in the early morning hours. The house was dark and quiet. My throat was dry, so I got up to get some water. I walked carefully down the hallway, listening for any sign of movement outside. When I reached the living room, I caught a glimpse of the window. My stomach flipped. That figure was right there, pressed against the glass. I dropped my water bottle on the floor, the plastic hitting the carpet with a dull thud. My pulse hammered in my ears. The silhouette had its face, or what seemed like its face, right against the window. I couldn't make out eyes or a mouth, but it was clear it was looking in. I stood frozen, unsure what to do. The glass between us felt thin. It was just a barrier that could be broken at any moment. I reached for the wall switch, flicked it on, and watched the figure vanish again. Like it had never been there. It didn't run to the side this time. It just seemed to melt away into the darkness. My hands shook. I locked the front door again, even though I knew it was already locked. I paced around the living room, feeling a surge of adrenaline. I checked the time on my phone. It was 3:14 a.m. I stared at the window for a while, heart still pounding. Then I decided to make some tea in the kitchen, thinking maybe the act of doing something normal might help me calm down. I boiled some water, waiting in silence, trying not to look toward the living room. My mind raced with questions. Who the hell was that? Why were they doing this? Was it some random person messing with me, or was it a neighbor? The tea didn't do much. I felt unsettled. I thought about calling the police, but I didn't have any hard evidence. I just had my own sightings, and each time I turned on the light, there was no one there. I still considered it, but decided to wait until morning. I figured I could try talking to a neighbor first, or maybe installing some kind of security camera my brother kept in the garage. I remembered he mentioned having an old camera that connected to his Wi-Fi. I spent the rest of the night on the couch, the living room light on, staring at the window. Nothing else happened. Before dawn. When morning came, I put on my shoes and stepped outside. The air was cool and the grass was wet with dew. I walked around the front yard looking for footprints or any sign of trespassing. I didn't see anything obvious. The porch looked normal. No scratches, no marks on the window. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I went back inside, grabbed my phone, and sent my brother a text. I didn't want to freak him out, so I just asked if he had ever seen anyone hanging around the house. He replied that he hadn't and asked if something was wrong. I said no, that everything was fine, and I was just curious. I felt a little guilty for not telling him the truth, but I didn't want to ruin his trip. Later that afternoon, I found the security camera in the garage. It was a simple outdoor camera with a small mounting bracket. My brother told me once that he never got around to setting it up because he trusted the neighborhood. I spent an hour reading the quick guide and figuring out how to connect it to the Wi-Fi. I placed it on the windowsill inside the house. Pointing out through the living room window, I knew it might not get the best view because of the glass reflection. But it was something. I set my phone to receive alerts. If the camera detected motion as evening came, I started feeling anxious again. I turned on some background music, paced the house, and checked the camera feed. Every few minutes it showed a clear image of the porch. The angle wasn't perfect, but it would pick up any figure standing near the window. My plan was to collect video if the silhouette came back. Then I'd have proof to show the police. Night fell. I kept the lights in the living room off for a while, hoping the silhouette would appear so I could catch it on camera. Hours passed. Nothing happened. Around midnight, I started to nod off on the couch. I had my phone in my hand, ready to check any alerts. I dozed, drifting in and out of a half-sleep. Then my phone buzzed. I shot upright, my heart skipping a beat. There was a motion alert. I tapped the notification, bringing up the live camera feed. For a moment, I saw the silhouette standing at the edge of the porch, off to one side. My breath caught in my throat. But in the feed, the figure shifted, then slid out of frame. It happened too fast. I jumped up, careful not to turn on any lights. I crept to the window, staying low, and peered out. I couldn't see it. The porch looked empty. The camera had recorded a short clip, so I played it back. It showed a dark shape leaning in from the side of the porch as if checking whether I was awake. Then it disappeared. My hands shook as I watched it. At least I had something now. I decided that if it came back again, I'd call the police right away. I stood there, my back against the wall, staring at my phone screen, waiting for another alert. My pulse raced, my mouth felt dry, and I could feel sweat on my temples. The music was still playing softly in the background, and the mundane sound of it felt out of place with the situation. I turned it off, preferring silence. Minutes ticked by, each one felt longer than the last, then another buzz. My screen showed a figure right at the window again. Just like before, I felt my stomach drop. This was it. I dialed 911. Immediately, I whispered into the phone, telling them there was a prowler on my property. They asked for my address, and I gave it to them. My voice trembling, they said they'd send someone over. I held the phone in my hand. The line disconnected and inched toward the window. The silhouette was close. I could see it clearly through the glass. It was tall, maybe wearing a coat, possibly with a hood. It pressed closer, one arm raised against the window like it was trying to peek inside. I felt trapped, like my feet were stuck to the floor. I heard my own shaky breathing. The silhouette didn't make any sound. It just stood there, unmoving. Then it bolted to the side of the house, vanishing from my field of view. I stayed where I was, too scared to run to the door. Within a few minutes, I saw flashing lights through the window. A police car pulled up in front of the house. I rushed to the door, flicked on the porch light, and opened it just enough to let the officers in. 2 uniformed cops stepped inside, shining their flashlights around. They asked me what happened. I told them everything. They walked around the outside of the house, checked the yard, and even looked down the street. Nothing. No footprints, no sign of forced entry. They suggested it might be a local who wandered onto the property by mistake, but they didn't dismiss my story outright. I showed them the camera footage. One of the officers nodded and said they'd keep an eye on the area for the rest of the night. They left after taking my statement and asking if I wanted them to stay parked outside. I said I felt safe enough with the camera and the knowledge they'd patrol the area. Still, it was hard to settle down. Every little noise made me jump. I thought about trying to sleep, but I couldn't. I sat on the couch, staring at the blank TV screen, glancing at my phone every few seconds, waiting for another alert from the camera. The rest of the night was quiet. No more alerts, no more sightings. By morning, I felt exhausted. I hadn't slept at all, and my nerves were shot. I stayed another day in that house, but the figure never came back again during the day. I emailed the camera clip to the local police station just so they had it on file on the last day of my stay. My brother came back. I was sitting in the living room half asleep when he walked in. He could tell something was wrong the moment he saw me. I handed him the phone and showed him the footage. He looked worried and said he was sorry I had to deal with that. He promised to set up a permanent security system and maybe install some floodlights outside. I left that same afternoon, relieved to be out of there. I never found out who that sill belonged to or why they targeted my brother's place since then. He's told me he hasn't seen anything else. The police never identified anyone in the footage, and I never heard about another incident in the neighborhood, but sometimes late at night I still feel that sinking sensation in my stomach when I recall that shape. Pressed against the glass, staring, in the memory of it keeps me on edge even now. I always lock my doors at dusk, and I keep a light on in whatever room I'm in. I'm not taking any chances. I noticed him the first week after I moved in. It was around 7 at night, the sky was getting dark, and I was in the kitchen washing a few plates. My new place felt quiet, the windows were open, and I could hear the leaves outside scraping against the fence in the wind out of the corner of my eye. Through the window above the sink, I caught a glimpse of movement near the garage. At first, I thought it was an animal, but then I realized it was a tall figure in a hood standing near the side of the garage like he was looking straight at the house. I froze in place. My muscles felt tight. I tried to blink a few times, but he was still there. I wanted to drop everything and go outside, but I hesitated. I looked away for a second to grab a towel, and by the time I turned back, he was gone. I hurried to the back door, shoved it open, and ran to the garage area, but I didn't see anyone. The ground was too hard and dry for footprints. There was no noise, no movement, just the faint smell of damp earth and the hum of distant traffic. I walked around for a few minutes, even checked behind the garage, but nothing looked out of place. Finally, I gave up and went back inside. I chalked it up to stress from the move or maybe some random passerby. A few days later, it happened again. This time it was nearly dusk. I was outside stacking some boxes in the garage when I noticed a shadow on the driveway. I turned fast, and there he was near the back wall in a dark hood. He was tall, definitely taller than me. He had his hands at his sides, barely moving. I shouted at him, "Hey, can I help you with something?" My voice came out louder than I expected, echoing off the walls. He didn't respond. He shifted slightly like he was about to take a step, but he didn't run. I dropped the box I was holding and started walking toward him. I tried to keep my gaze locked on him, but something about his stillness made me feel uneasy. When I got within maybe 20 feet, he slipped behind the wall. By the time I reached that spot, he was gone. I looked over the wall and saw nothing but weeds and patchy grass. I checked the gate. It was closed. I even tested it, pulled on it, but it was locked from my side. No one could have gone through there without me hearing it open or shut. My heart was pounding. I felt this wave of adrenaline in my chest, and sweat was building up on my forehead. I went back inside and locked every door. The days kept passing, and I saw him a couple more times, always around the same hour, right before it got completely dark. Every time I tried to run outside, he would vanish. No footprints, no sound, nothing. I started to think maybe I was imagining it, but I knew I wasn't. One night, I decided to stay up late and watch from the living room window. I turned off all the lights in the house so it was pitch black inside. I positioned myself near the window with a clear view of the garage. I sat there for at least an hour, just staring out into my yard. My legs started to cramp, and I tried to ignore it. The silence of the house made me notice every small noise, every creak, every rustle outside. My heart was beating faster than normal, and my breathing felt shallow. Then I saw a shape gliding by the fence. I squinted, pressing my forehead to the cold glass. It was him again. He stopped near the garage door, tilting his head like he was listening for something. I held my breath. My fingers were clenched on the windowsill, nails digging into the wood. He moved a step closer to my house, then paused. I felt my mouth go dry. I wanted to rush outside, but fear held me in place for a few seconds. When I finally forced myself to move, I flicked on the porch light and bolted for the back door. I jerked it open and jumped onto the small concrete step leading to the yard. The porch light flooded the driveway with a yellowish glow. By the time I turned the corner, the space was empty. He was gone again. I spent the next day checking the property thoroughly. In daylight, I walked the perimeter, examined the walls, tried to see if there were gaps in the fence or maybe some hidden path. The gate was always locked, and the walls were too tall to climb easily. I even tried to climb one myself just to see if it was possible. I couldn't do it without making noise, and I ended up scratching my hand on a rough patch of concrete. Everything about this figure was starting to wear on me. I Didn't feel safe. I couldn't focus on my work. I kept looking out the window, expecting him to show up at any moment. My shoulders were tense all day. When the sun set, I felt a knot form in my stomach. One evening, I decided I'd set a trap. I had motion sensor lights in a box from my old place, so I installed a couple near the garage and another closer to the back fence. I tested them. As soon as someone walked within a certain range, the lights would switch on. That night, I made an effort to go about my usual routine: wash dishes, watch some TV, and pretend I wasn't obsessing about this. Intruder around 7:30. I heard a click outside, followed by the motion light turning on. My heart leapt. I grabbed a flashlight and ran toward the door. The sensor lights were bright, illuminating a portion of the yard. I usually couldn't see well at night. I stepped outside. The gravel crunched under my shoes. The beam from my flashlight cut across the empty driveway. No one was there the next night. The same thing happened. Lights triggered. I rushed out, but he wasn't there. It was like he was messing with me. Maybe he was testing how quickly I responded, or maybe he knew exactly how to avoid me. I started to lose sleep. Every noise made me jump. I jolt awake around 3 in the morning, thinking. I heard footsteps on the gravel outside my window. I'd get up, look around, find nothing. I was wound up tight all day, and by evening I was just drained. Then came the night I found footprints. It was a clear evening. The breeze was cool, and I had the window open in the living room. I kept checking the yard from time to time. Around the usual hour, I glanced out and didn't see anything. So I walked to the kitchen. I heard the motion light click on again, and I felt a burst of adrenaline shoot through my arms and chest. I hurried to the back door, twisted the lock, and practically sprinted out. I called out, "Hey, I know you're here." My breath was shaky and my throat felt tight. The only answer was silence. The sensor light was shining on the ground. Near the garage, I didn't see anyone, but the dirt area next to the garage looked different. I crouched down, shone my flashlight, and saw a clear set of footprints in the soft soil. They were big, larger than my own shoe print. The tread pattern was deep, like from heavy boots. I felt a cold wave run down my back. I traced the footprints with the flashlight. They moved toward the wall, then stopped. There were no footprints leading away. It didn't make sense. The gate was locked from the inside. I walked to it and tested the lock, still secure. I ran my hand over the top. Even if he had climbed it, the soil near the base should have shown some scuff marks or extra prints. There weren't any. It was like he stepped into the dirt, made a few footprints, then vanished. I turned around and looked up at the sky, hoping for some clarity, but there was nothing to see up there except stars. I stood by those footprints for a long time. The sensor light went off, so I was left in darkness. My mind was racing. My mouth felt dry. I turned the flashlight back on and tried to take photos of the footprints with my phone, my hand trembling. Then I headed inside, locked the door, and double-checked every window. My body was shaking, and I had to take a few breaths to calm myself. My chest felt tight, and my heart wouldn't slow down. I couldn't stay there another moment without doing something, so I texted a friend who lived about 20 minutes away. I told him what was happening. He said he'd come over the next day to check things out the following afternoon. He arrived. We walked the yard together. It was broad daylight. Some of the footprints had blurred, but you could still see them. We followed them again, and the trail ended at the wall. My friend tried pushing on the bricks, looking for a hidden door or a loose section. Everything was solid. He walked around the yard, searching for any sign of forced entry. Nothing. We went inside and checked the windows, the locks, the doors, all secure. He asked if maybe it was a neighbor messing around. I told him I hardly had neighbors and none were close enough to pass by. Casually, he shrugged and suggested maybe it was just some drifter. He left me a spare baseball bat and told me to call him if I saw anything again. That night, I didn't relax. I sat in a chair near the window until my legs got stiff, scanning the yard, waiting. The sensor lights flicked on 3 separate times, and each time I ran out. But I found nothing. My legs felt heavy, and every time I came back inside, I felt my nerves jolt. I was sweatier than usual, and my shirt clung to my back around 10. I decided to go to bed. I put the bat beside my nightstand, turned off the lights, and crawled under the covers. My muscles were so tense I couldn't get comfortable. I lay there in the dark listening. I must have dozed off at some point. I woke up around midnight to a noise outside. It sounded like something scraped against metal. I snatched the bat, jumped out of bed, and rushed to the living room window. The moon was bright, and I could see a faint silhouette near the side of the garage. My heart was thawing in my ears, and my knees felt weak. I almost forgot to breathe. I forced myself to unlock the back door and slip outside, trying not to make noise. The yard looked calm in the moonlight. I crept toward the garage, gripping the bat so hard my knuckles ached. As soon as I turned the corner, I heard a soft crunch. I swung the flashlight beam around, but the spot was empty. The gate stood closed and locked. I tried the handle, still secure. I bit my lip. Feeling sweat trickled down the side of my face in the morning. I called someone to install extra security cameras around the house. I had them. Place cameras on every side of the property, including above the garage and near the back gate by evening. I had the feeds running on my phone, checking them every few minutes. The tension was eating at me, and I wasn't sure if I was going to catch anything or not. But I had to try something. That night I settled into a chair with my phone in my lap, the bat leaning against the wall. The camera showed static images of my yard. Shadows moved with the wind. Tree branches swayed, and my motion lights would turn on. Every so often midnight came and went. By 2 in the morning, I was still staring at my phone. Then out of nowhere, one of the cameras picked up movement by the fence. I leaned forward, nearly dropping my phone. The tall figure appeared in the frame for maybe 2 seconds, then he slipped out of sight. I jumped up, heart racing, grabbed the bat, and ran outside. The air was chilly against my face. My flashlight cut through the darkness as I scanned the fence line. Nothing. I sprinted around the corner, shining light on every patch of ground I saw. No footprints. The sensor lights activated, illuminating empty space. My breath came out in short gasps. I felt a throbbing in my temples. I checked the gate, still locked. It was like he was taunting me. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I paced around, checking windows and watching the camera feeds until dawn. My body felt fatigued, and my mind couldn't rest in the morning. I found my reflection in the bathroom mirror. Red eyes, stubble on my cheeks, face drawn tight. I thought about calling the police, but I had so little to show. No forced entry, no theft, no direct threat. Just the footage of a hooded figure for a couple of seconds. They'd probably do a drive-by and tell me to keep my doors locked. Since then, the sightings continue, but they're unpredictable. Some nights I hear the sensor lights click on, and I'll catch a glimpse of him on the camera for a brief moment. Every time I rush out, he's gone, leaving nothing but an eerie silence. Sometimes I find footprints, sometimes not. The gate remains locked, and I can't figure out how he's getting in or out. I feel tense every evening, wondering if he'll show up again. My stomach churns when the sun starts to go down. I've covered every inch of my property in cameras and motion lights, but he still appears and disappears at will. I've thought about moving, but that feels like giving up. Maybe one day I'll catch him. Maybe I'll find out who he is and why he keeps showing up. Until then, I live in this strange routine, waiting, watching, and never quite feeling safe. That's my life now. In this secluded place, I came here for peace and quiet. And instead, I'm dealing with a hooded stranger who leaves no trace. Except the occasional footprint in the dirt. It's a constant weight on my shoulders. My only hope is that he never tries to come inside. I keep every door locked. I keep the bat close. I'm always listening, always waiting for the next time he appears by that garage wall. And when he does, I'll be ready to confront him or at least try. That's all I can do at this point. I stopped my car on the side of that narrow road and looked around. My GPS had lost its signal an hour earlier, and the only sign of life I saw was an old hand-painted advertisement for a bookstore and souvenir shop. The sky was gray and a slight breeze rustled the tall grass near the ditch. My stomach felt tense and my arms were tired from gripping the steering wheel. For so long the place seemed deserted, I decided I needed a break, so I pulled into the dirt driveway in front of a small, weather-beaten building. When I stepped out of the car, I noticed the front door was open just a crack. A dull wooden sign hung above it, half covered by a dead vine. The words "books and oddities" were barely visible in peeling white paint. The outside walls were worn and gray, and the window glass looked foggy from the inside. I walked up the single step to the porch and tried to peek in, but the angle was too sharp and the interior looked dim. I pushed the door open with my shoulder, half expecting it to creak loudly, but it swung inward with barely a sound. The moment I stepped inside, a smell of old paper and damp wood filled my nose. There was a clutter of dusty books on mismatched shelves, and the floorboards made a soft groan under my weight. I saw glass cases filled with strange objects. Wooden masks, tarnished silver trinkets, old coins. The dim light came from a single overhead bulb that flickered sometimes, casting shadows on the floor. An older woman stood behind a narrow counter. Her hair was gray, tied back in a loose bun. Her face had deep lines and her eyes were bright. Even in that poor light, before I could say a word, she looked straight at me and said, "Hello, Daniel." My muscles tightened when she used my name. I glanced at my jacket, wondering if I had a name tag, but there was nothing there. My heart thudded in my chest. I swallowed and forced a smile. "Sorry." "Do I know you?" I asked, keeping my voice as calm as I could. She stared at me, then grinned. Her thin lips curved just enough to show she wasn't frightened or surprised. She didn't answer my question. Instead, she spoke in a gentle but raspy voice. "Does your grandfather still will wear that silver watch of his?" I felt a sudden rush of cold at the back of my neck. My grandfather had passed away several years ago. He had a silver watch, but it stopped working long before I was born, and he had kept it in his top drawer. The older woman's question made no sense. My pulse sped up, and my palms began to sweat. I remembered that watch in detail: smooth metal, a bit of rust near the clasp, and a faint engraving on the inside. I tried to steady my breathing. "I cleared my throat, ma'am," I said, my voice sounding shaky. "My grandfather's been gone for a while." She kept her slight smile and nodded. "I see, so he doesn't use it anymore." Then my stomach clenched. I took a step closer to the counter and looked around for a place to set my keys. I ended up just gripping them in my right hand. "Who told you that?" I asked. She shrugged, lifted a small duster from behind the counter and started brushing off some books. "No one told me," she replied. Her tone was casual. She didn't look nervous or startled by my reaction. "But you came a long way, right? You must be tired. Take a look around." I felt an urge to leave, but I also felt drawn in by the strangeness of it all. I wanted to know how she knew my name and why she was bringing up my grandfather. I couldn't sense any immediate danger. She was just an old woman in a quiet shop, so I stayed. I walked over to the first shelf on the left side of the store. It was packed with old hardcovers and paperbacks that looked like they hadn't been touched in years. Some of the titles were in languages I didn't recognize. The spines had faded lettering and the edges of the pages were yellow. As I moved along the shelf, I heard the light buzz of that overhead bulb. My hands felt cold despite the stuffy air inside. There was no heater or fan, just the musty scent of books and old wood. I touched the spine of a thick, dark blue book. Feeling the rough texture, I tried to keep my mind steady, but I kept thinking about how she said my name. I wanted to ask her again, but part of me felt hesitant. She was humming softly behind the counter. I caught a melody that reminded me of an old lullaby, but I couldn't place it. I took a deep breath and decided to head back to her. I approached the sea and laid my keys on the wooden surface with a gentle clink. She stopped humming and looked up at me. "I'm not sure what's going on here," I said, choosing my words carefully. "I just came in to stretch my legs. I'm traveling through this area. I got lost and I saw your sign. But you called me by my name and you mentioned my grandfather's watch." She leaned forward, resting her arms on the counter. Her fingernails were clipped short and her hands looked thin. "Yes, I did. I thought you might have questions, but sometimes answers are less important than they seem." I felt my face tighten, my brow furrowed. "I don't understand," I said in a low voice. I could hear my heart pounding in my ears. She reached under the counter and brought out a small metal box. It looked like a jewelry case with a simple latch at the front. She placed it between us. Without a word, she flipped the latch and opened the lid inside. There was a single folded piece of parchment. She lifted it out carefully and set it on the counter. I stared at it, then at her. She motioned for me to open it. I hesitated, but eventually leaned forward. I unfolded it. The paper felt fragile in my hands. There was handwriting on it, very faint and spidery. It looked old. I recognized my grandfather's name at the bottom, signed in the cursive style he used to teach me when I was a kid. My eyes scanned the lines. But the text was hard to read. I managed to pick out a few words. I saw a date that matched the year I was born. I saw my name, Daniel, twice. I couldn't figure out the rest. My chest tightened. My breathing went shallow. I felt a wave of confusion. This was my grandfather's handwriting. But how did this woman have it? She tapped the parchment gently with her finger. "He left it here," she said. "He wanted you to see it when you were ready." I shook my head. "He never told me about this place. I never even knew he traveled here." She smiled again, that same small curve of her lips. She took the parchment from me, folded it, and placed it back in the metal box. Then she closed the box and set it aside. "Do you still have his watch?" she asked again, her voice soft but clear. I exhaled in a rush. "No. It's in a trunk in my basement. It doesn't work anymore. It hasn't worked in decades." She nodded, as if that explained everything. I felt a sudden jolt in my stomach, like I was on the edge of a secret I didn't want to discover. I reached up and rubbed the back of my neck. My skin felt clammy and sweat bead on my forehead. The tension in the room was thick, but she seemed completely at ease. "Would you like some water?" she asked, tilting her head. I realized my throat was dry, so I nodded. She left the counter and went through a door in the back while she was gone. I took a moment to look at the glass cases. I saw small figurines carved from stone, antique compasses, and tarnished spoons from different places. One case held a pair of spectacles that had a thin crack in one lens. Another held old photographs of people standing outside cabins or in fields. None of them looked familiar, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the whole place was tied to my past in some odd way. The floor creaked when she returned with a plastic cup of water. I thanked her and took a sip. It tasted cool and a bit metallic, but it helped calm my dry throat. She placed her hands on the counter, fingers spread out, and watched me. I cleared my throat again. I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do here, I said. I need directions back to the main road. I was heading to Pinewood Ridge. She nodded. Pinewood Ridge is about 30 mi south. You won't get there easily on the route you took. You can follow the dirt road behind this building for a bit. It leads to an old highway that's still passable. I pulled out my phone and tried to check for a signal. There was nothing. I felt a surge of frustration. Okay, I said, slipping my phone back into my pocket. Maybe I can write this down. Could you show me on a map, of course? She said. She reached under the counter again and pulled out a folded paper map. It had creases and a few coffee stains. She spread it out in front of me and traced a path with her finger. Her fingernail tapped a line that branched off from a small dot labeled as the name of this town. This is where we are, she explained, and this is the old highway that goes south. There's a split here. You take the left side and it merges with the main road about 15. Later, I leaned in to memorize the route. The map looked outdated, but I didn't see any other option. I took a photo of it with my phone, even though I didn't have service. At least I could use the photo as a reference. When I finished, I looked up at her. She was watching me with a calm expression. I tried to ignore the uneasy feeling in my gut and asked, "Is there anything else I need to know about that road?" She shook her head. "Just drive slowly. The asphalt is worn down in places. Keep an eye out for potholes." I nodded, folding the map carefully and placing it in my jacket pocket. My mind still buzzed with questions about her knowledge of my name and my grandfather. I couldn't walk away without asking one more time. "Listen," I said, my voice tense. "I don't know how you know about me or my family, but I'd like to figure it out. Did he come here once? Did he leave you that note?" Why? She studied my face for a moment before answering. "He came in one afternoon. He was traveling too. He said one day you might show up. He asked me to keep that note safe, but why?" I pressed. "What's so special about this note? It's just a piece of paper with his handwriting." She placed a hand on the metal box. "He wanted you to have something to connect your memories. He believed you'd understand in your own time." Her words gave me no real explanation. I felt my hand ball into fists. I forced myself to unclench them and breathe. My heart was racing and I wanted to get back on the road, but at the same time a part of me wanted more answers. "Can I take it with me?" I asked, pointing at the box. She shook her head. "It has to stay here. It wouldn't do you any good to carry it around." My eyebrows knitted together in frustration. "That makes no sense, I know," she said quietly, "but that's what he wanted." I decided I'd had enough of this place. My body felt tight with stress and my head hurt from the confusion. I picked up my car keys from the counter and slipped them into my pocket. "Thank you for the directions," I said. "I'll head out now." She nodded once. "Safe travels, Daniel." Her voice had a note of finality in it. I turned to leave, stepping across the uneven floor at the door. I paused and looked back at her. She was still behind the counter, hands folded in front of her eyes, steady on me. The overhead bulb flickered again, and in that brief change of light, I thought I saw something odd in her expression. It was a kind of sadness, but it flashed away as fast as it appeared. I pushed the door open and stepped onto the porch. The breeze outside felt good on my face, though it carried a slight chill. The sky was still gray. I walked to my car, hearing the crunch of gravel under my shoes when I opened the driver's side door. I glanced back at the shop. The sign swung a little in the wind and the open doorway was dark. My heart thumped hard as I slid into the seat. I shut the door and took a few slow breaths before starting the engine. The tension in my shoulders made my neck ache. I shook my head to clear my thoughts, then I shifted into reverse and backed out, following her directions. I found a rough dirt path behind the building. The car jostled and rattled as I drove over uneven ground. Weeds brushed the underside of the chassis. I checked the rearview mirror once, but I couldn't see the shop anymore. Trees and tall grass blocked my view. I felt a strange relief. The further I went, eventually I came to a cracked, narrow highway. Potholes lined the edges, and plants had grown through some of the larger breaks in the pavement. I followed it carefully, checking the photo I had taken of the map. The road curved through empty fields and low hills. My stomach was still in knots, and my thoughts kept going back to that old woman, the note, and my grandfather's silver watch. I wondered if maybe he had visited that place while traveling for work when he was younger. Maybe it was some family mystery. I pressed my hand to my forehead, trying to focus on the drive instead of those questions. As the miles passed, the highway started looking a bit more maintained. I saw a faded sign that pointed toward Pinewood Ridge. I felt a flutter of relief in my chest. The tension in my back eased a little. I realized I'd been breathing in shallow bursts, so I took a few deeper breaths. The air had a light scent of rain, and I saw clouds gathering to the west. I kept my eyes on the road and told myself I would leave this mystery alone, but I knew that wouldn't happen. Once I was settled in Pinewood Ridge, I planned to open that trunk in my basement, take out the silver watch, and examine every inch of it. Maybe I'd find something inside, like an engraving or a date that tied back to that note. Maybe there would be no connection. But I had to be sure. When I finally reached a junction that merged with a wider road, I spotted a gas station and decided to stop. I pulled in next to a pump, shut off the engine, and rested my head against the seat for a moment. My hands were shaky from tension. I closed my eyes and replayed the scene in the shop, her calm expression, the parchment, my grandfather's signature. It felt like a strange dream, but it was all real. After refueling, I went inside to pay. The station clerk asked me if I needed a receipt. I said yes, then headed to the small bathroom to wash my face. I looked at myself in the mirror. My eyes were red around the edges. My skin looked pale under the harsh fluorescent light. I splashed water on my cheeks, the cold sting insulting me awake. I returned to my car, sat for a moment, and placed my hands on the steering wheel. I didn't know what to feel, but I knew I wasn't done with that old shop. Part of me wanted to go back right then and demand more answers, but I also felt a strong urge to keep moving. Something about that place made my chest feel tight, like it was hard to breathe. I pulled out of the gas station and continued toward Pinewood Ridge. The road was straight and lined with tall pines. My cell phone beeped, picking up a signal again. Messages started coming through. I glanced at them but didn't reply. I decided I would explain my delay to people later. Right now, my mind was stuck on everything that had happened. I had no idea how that woman knew me. I had no idea why she was so sure about my grandfather's watch. But her confidence and that note in the box shook me. I felt like I had stepped into a small crack in time and peeked into something I wasn't supposed to see. My heartbeat finally settled as I got closer to town. But my thoughts kept circling. I knew I would be thinking about that place for a long time. For now, all I could do was drive forward. My arms were stiff on the wheel, and my back ached from the stress of the afternoon. I noticed that my mouth felt dry again. I reached over for a bottle of water, took a long drink, and exhaled slowly. The trees rushed by on either side. The color of the sky shifted from gray to a softer white, and I could see the outline of mountains on the horizon. I glanced at the clock on my dashboard and saw that I was running late, but I couldn't bring myself to speed up. My mind stayed locked on the memory of that shop and that old woman. I could almost smell the musty air again. I wondered if she was still there, standing behind the counter, humming that soft melody, waiting for the next person who might wander in. I wondered if there was anyone else she greeted like that. No matter how much I tried, I couldn't come up with a logical explanation for her knowledge. The best I could do was assume my grandfather had known her somehow. Maybe they were pen pals, maybe they crossed paths a long time ago. Or maybe there was something deeper that I just couldn't explain, whatever it was. I felt uneasy and curious. At the same time, I drove on, eventually arriving at Pinewood Ridge, checking into a small motel near the main street in my room. I threw my bag onto the floor, sat on the edge of the bed, and thought about heading back the next day, but my body felt drained, my thoughts felt scattered, and I just needed a break. I decided to stay, and that night I'd deal with the rest later yet. As I closed my eyes, I couldn't stop picturing that folded parchment. I recalled my grandfather's signature. I recalled the old woman's voice and asking if he still wore that silver watch. And I realized I had a choice: forget it all and move on, or keep digging. But in that moment, I was too tired and tense to decide. I let my mind drift until I fell into a restless sleep. That was how my day ended, with more questions than answers. A tightness in my chest and the strange certainty that I wasn't done with that shop or my grandfather's secrets just yet. I pulled up to the driveway that morning and felt my stomach tightened right away. The old Victorian mansion rose in front of me, all peeling paint and tall windows. I'm a real estate agent, and I've seen a lot of empty houses, but this one had a vibe that set me on edge the minute I parked. I remember the silence around it, no birds, no passing cars, just the wind against the chipped siding and a creak from somewhere near the eaves. I hadn't even stepped out of my car yet, and I was already wishing I could cancel, but my clients were expecting me. So I got out, straightened my tie, and headed up the path. I had spoken to the owners by phone a week before they gave me the code for the lockbooks and told me the place had been vacant for months. They wanted to sell and leave the past behind. No major issues with the structure, they said, good bones. But it needed updates. They warned me it had been on the market before and never moved. Something about local rumors and a history of spooky sightings. I shrugged it off at the time, figuring it was just the usual talk around an old house in a small town. But as I approached the front steps, I caught myself scanning the windows. The new owner's car pulled in behind mine. The husband, Dave, and the wife, Karen, got out. Dave was a tall guy with a calm expression. Karen looked restless. Hands fidgeting with her purse straps, I waved and waited for them on the porch. The steps groaned under my weight. Karen glanced at the second floor before she even said hi. I noticed her eyebrows pull together. She opened her mouth like she wanted to say something, but she stayed quiet. I greeted them. We exchanged a few standard remarks. Dave asked about property taxes. Karen looked up at the windows. Then we walked to the big wooden front door. The old lockbooks was stiff, and I had to jiggle the numbers a few times. The place smelled damp and stale. Even from outside, I focused on getting the key, trying to ignore the unease in my gut. That's when Karen sucked in her breath. She didn't let out a scream or anything, but she made a sharp, startled sound. I turned to see if she was okay. She was staring at the upstairs window on the left side of the house. She grabbed Dave's sleeve and said, "There's somebody up there." Dave looked at me and I gave him a confused shrug. There shouldn't be anyone inside. The owner said it was empty and the utilities were off. But Karen insisted she saw a face in that window. I felt a rush of panic. My first thought was that maybe squatters had broken in or some intruder was roaming around. Or maybe an animal was inside, but Karen insisted she saw a person. So I finally got the key out and unlocked the door. It stuck. and I had to use my shoulder to push it open. The smell inside was worse, old dust. Closed up air, maybe mold, sunlight filtered through the dirty windows, giving just enough light to see the corridor ahead. Karen hesitated on the threshold, looking like she was ready to sprint back to the car. Dave put a hand on her shoulder and they both followed me. And my plan was to check each room systematically so we wouldn't miss anything. I flipped a light switch out of habit. Nothing happened. The electricity was off as expected, so we only had the daylight from the windows. We started in the front parlor. It had high ceilings and dark wallpaper that was peeling near the corners. A big fireplace took up most of one wall. A thick layer of dust coated the floor. I noticed no footprints, no signs that anyone had been walking around. I told Karen that maybe she saw a reflection in the glass. She shook her head. She said it was definitely a face and it looked like someone was peering right at her. We moved on to the dining room. Same story, dusty table, chairs covered with old sheets. No footprints. The air felt cold, and not just from the lack of heating. I had a sense of tightness in my chest. My pulse was steady but strong, and I caught myself swallowing more often. I didn't say anything about it. Karen clutched Dave's arm and he kept reassuring her in a low voice that there was probably a logical explanation from the dining room. We went to the kitchen. A big old-fashioned sink and ancient cabinets lined the walls. I checked the back door, locked. We looked inside a small pantry, empty, just a few cobwebs. Everything was quiet except for our footsteps every time I stepped. The boards creaked and dust rose in little clouds around my shoes. When we finished the first floor, I headed back to the main hallway. The staircase loomed there, winding up to the second level. Karen stared at it. Dave took a deep breath and said we should check upstairs. I wanted to keep them calm, so I said I'd go first. I tested the first step. It squeaked, but it felt stable enough. With each step, I heard a groan from the old wood. We climbed slowly, and I felt my shoulders tense. I kept one hand on the railing, my heart beating a little faster with each creak. Karen stayed behind, Dave hugging his side. On the second floor, the hallway stretched in both directions with rooms on either side. The door at the far end was closed. The others were open. I stepped into the first bedroom. The curtains were drawn, so it was dim inside. I moved them aside to let in some light. Dust swirled in the air, lit up by the sunbeams. There was a bare mattress on a rusty bed frame against the wall. Other than that, nothing. No fresh footprints. No sign of anyone hiding under the bed or in the closet. I felt the walls for any hidden compartments, but found nothing. We checked the next two bedrooms the same way, all empty, all dusty, all quiet. The boards creaked under our weight. But as soon as we stood still, there was silence. The only sound was our breathing. Karen's breath was short and shallow, and Dave's was a bit ragged. Mine was faster than normal, but I tried to keep it steady. My mouth felt dry. We reached the door at the end of the hallway. It was closed. The handle felt cold in my palm. I turned it, and the door opened with a scrape. Inside was a larger bedroom with a big window facing the front of the property. The glass was filthy, but light still came through. This must have been the room Karen pointed at from outside. I stopped in front of the window and looked out toward our cars. Could see the porch roof below and the yard stretching out to the road. Everything looked calm and empty, no sign of movement. Dave and Karen came up behind me. Karen said it was right here. She pointed to the exact spot behind the window glass. She said she saw a face looking down at us. I heard the tremor in her voice. We walked around the room, checking corners in the closet, all empty, all dusty. No footprints other than ours. I felt relief and confusion at the same time. If someone had been inside, we would have found something. Maybe a leftover smell or a sign of forced entry or at least tracks in the dust. There was nothing, just still stale air, I told Karen. I believed she saw something, but it might have been a trick of the light or a shadow. She looked at me with wide eyes and said it was definitely a face. I didn't argue, I could see. She was rattled and I wanted to move on. Dave asked if there was an attic. I said yes, but it was just a crawl space above the second floor. I wasn't sure how to access it, but I guessed there might be a hatch in the hallway ceiling. We stepped out of the bedroom and scanned the ceiling until we found a rectangular outline with a small pull cord. I grabbed a nearby chair from one of the other rooms and placed it under the hatch. I climbed up carefully and pulled the hatch open. Dust rained down on my face and shoulders, making me cough. My eyes watered. I waved the dust away and shined my phone's flashlight into the dark space above. The attic was cramped, most insulation and wooden beams. I poked my head inside for a better look. The air was thick and musty. I didn't see any footprints in the thin layer of dust on the boards. No boxes, no furniture, no sign of life. I listened, but there was nothing. I climbed back down and brushed myself off. We had checked every possible area. Nobody was in the house, no footprints other than ours, no open windows, no broken light box. The house was empty. Just dusty rooms and a weird chill in the air. Karen kept glancing at the windows. Dave shook his head like he was trying to figure out how to comfort her. I told them we could finish the tour, and if they still wanted to see more, I'd show them the basement. They agreed, though. Karen looked reluctant. We found the basement door next to the kitchen. It opened to a flight of narrow stairs leading down. I switched on my phone's flashlight. The basement smelled damp and earthy. The walls were stone and the floor was concrete. There were a few old shelves with paint cans and cleaning supplies, all coated in dust. A water heater stood in one corner, a furnace in another. Nothing unusual. No footprints, no signs of recent activity. We spent a few minutes looking around and then headed back up. Karen stayed close to Dave and I moved carefully, not wanting to trip in the dim light. Back in the kitchen, we paused near the sink. I asked them what they wanted to do. Dave said they needed some time to think. Karen nodded, arms still crossed over her stomach. I saw the tension in her shoulders. She looked at the ceiling, probably thinking about the figure she swears she saw in the upstairs window. Dave asked if the owners ever mentioned anything about break-in. I said they didn't. They told me the house had been vacant, but they didn't mention any intruders or problems. He sighed. Karen tapped her foot on the floor. I waited, unsure if I should say something reassuring or just stay quiet. We walked back to the foyer. The front door stood open, letting in fresh air. I could hear a faint rustle of leaves outside, and it felt like a relief after the stale interior. Karen exhaled loudly like she'd been holding her breath. Dave rubbed his eyes. I asked if they wanted to go back in for any reason. They both shook their heads. Karen said, "I'm done." Dave looked around one more time, then he nodded and said, "Yeah, let's go." We stepped out onto the porch. I locked the door behind us, making sure to jiggle the door knob to test it. The lock held firm. I felt the tension in my neck loosen a little. As soon as I was outside, Karen looked up at the second-floor windows again. She didn't say a word, but her face was set in an expression of mild disbelief or lingering fear. I turned to them and asked if they wanted me to contact them with more information about the property. Dave said he'd call me later. He wanted to discuss it with Karen. She just stood there, arms folded, staring at the windows. I nodded and gave them a polite goodbye. They walked to their car in silence. Dave helped Karen in, and then he got behind the wheel. They backed out of the driveway, and I watched the car disappear down the road. I was alone with the house again. I looked at the second-floor window and saw nothing, just a dirty pane of glass with the reflection of the sky behind me. but I felt uneasy, like the house was watching the wind picked up a little, making the porch railing creak. I thought about all the empty rooms and the thick dust on the floors. No footprints anywhere except ours. Karen was certain she saw someone. I couldn't explain it, but I hadn't found any sign of a person inside. I walked to my car, got in and sat there for a minute, just breathing. My hands were shaking a bit. I started the engine and felt a strange urge to look at the house. One last time I did. Nothing moved. No curtain swayed, no shadows crossed the windows. It was still and quiet, just an old Victorian waiting for a buyer. After a few more seconds, I backed out onto the street and drove away as I headed back toward the highway. I tried to think of a rational explanation. Maybe Karen's eyes played a trick on her. Maybe light hit the window in a weird way. Maybe dust on the glass formed a shape that looked like a face, but the memory of her sudden gasp and the fear in her eyes wouldn't leave me. I tried to shake it off and focus on the road. I checked my rear-view mirror. The mansion got smaller behind me until it vanished from sight. My pulse was still high, and I gripped the steering wheel harder than usual. I told myself it was just an empty house and we'd searched every corner. But a small part of me kept replaying Karen's words. There's somebody up there. I never reported anything to the owners. I never told them that a client claimed to see someone in the house. I just said the viewing went fine, but my buyers weren't interested. Maybe I should have mentioned it, but I didn't want to stir up more rumors. I tried to go about my day, returning to my office and handling other listings. Still, the memory of that morning stayed with me. Whenever I passed that part of town, I felt a little tightening in my stomach, and I found excuses not to drive by the mansion that night. I had trouble sleeping. I kept picturing that upstairs window and Karen's face when she said she saw someone. I thought of how the house felt inside. Silent, dusty, and cold. My mind drifted to the locked door. In the empty closets, I wondered if there was another entrance somewhere we didn't see, or if there was some hidden passage. But the owners never mentioned anything like that, and I didn't see any evidence of it the next day. Dave called me. He said they'd decided to pass on the property. I told him I understood. I didn't press for a reason. I said I was sorry it didn't work out. He asked if we found anything unusual in the house after we left. I said no, but I would follow up. I never did. I didn't want to go back there alone. I ended the call with a polite goodbye, and that was it. The house still comes up in my listing searches. Sometimes the owners lowered the price again recently, trying to draw in more interest. I haven't taken any new clients there. A colleague asked about it once, and I told him it's a tough sell because it needs serious repairs. I didn't talk about the rest. Nobody wants to hear a real estate agent say, "We thought we saw someone inside an empty house." I still can't explain what happened. Maybe Karen just got spooked. Maybe it was all in our heads, fueled by the quiet and the eerie feel of the place. But it felt real at the time. She insisted it was a face we heard. No footsteps found. No footprints, and didn't see any actual person inside. The dust was undisturbed yet. That moment still gives me chills when I think about it. I can't shake the feeling that we weren't alone in that house. And I'm in no hurry to find out for sure. I felt the blanket tighten around my ankles, as if someone was pulling it from the foot of the bed. My eyes opened wide and my breath caught in my throat. I was in bed alone. My girlfriend had left for a trip 3 days ago. I stayed behind to finish some tasks in town, so there was no one else in the house. I kept still for a moment. I felt my heart pounding in my chest. The darkness surrounded me, but I saw a slight movement at the bottom of the blanket. It rose up, then fell again, as if 2 invisible hands were tugging it. My first thought was that I was dreaming, but I felt the pressure around my legs. It was real. I reached over to the lamp on the nightstand. My hand was shaking. I fumbled with the switch, but the lamp didn't come on. I pressed the switch again and again. It stayed dark. I whispered a curse under my breath and tried to control my breathing. I always kept my phone on the nightstand, so I felt around for it. My fingers found it. I pressed the screen, hoping to light up the room a bit. The screen stayed black. The battery must have died. I knew I should have charged it before going to bed, but I'd fallen asleep early. The house was quiet. I heard no wind outside, no buzzing from lights or electronics. It felt too silent. I sat up, keeping the blanket around me. My legs felt cold. I thought about standing up, but I was afraid of stepping into the darkness. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone else was there, or something else. I told myself to stay calm. I felt an urge to call out to say hello and see if I got a response. I decided against it because the idea of someone answering made my stomach clench. I didn't want to hear a voice in the dark. I gripped the edges of the blanket and yanked it up toward my chest. I didn't feel any resistance now. It slid up easily for a second. I felt relief. Maybe I had imagined the tugging. Then I felt the pressure again. It was subtle, but it was there, pulling at the corner near my feet. I didn't see hands. I just saw the fabric move. It slid about an inch before I locked my knees and pinned the blanket under them. My heart thudded. My breathing sounded loud in my ears. Every part of my body felt tense. My throat was dry. And I swallowed hard. I wanted to turn the overhead light on, but the switch was by the door. That meant I had to walk across the room in the dark. I tried to steady my nerves. I told myself I could handle it. I threw the blanket aside, braced myself, and stepped onto the floor. The cold wood sent chills up my legs. I moved slowly toward the door, keeping my arms out in front of me. I didn't see any shapes or outlines that suggested a person. I only sensed that the darkness was heavier than normal. Each step made the floor creak under my weight. I reached the wall and slid my hand along it, looking for the light switch. My fingertips touched the switch and I flicked it upward. Nothing happened. I flicked it down, then up again. Still nothing. I couldn't think of any reason for a power outage. The weather had been clear. I hadn't heard about any scheduled maintenance. I stood there in the dark with no phone and no light. I turned to face the bed. I expected to see some shape. I half expected to see a person standing near the foot of the bed. But there was only darkness. I took a deep breath, walked back toward the bed, and reached for the blanket. I felt along the surface of the bed, searching for the corner of the blanket. The sheets were smooth and nothing. Felt strange. I knelt on the mattress and held the blanket in my hands. I tugged it, testing if there was resistance. This time it stayed in place. I climbed back under it, wishing I had at least a flashlight in the nightstand. I usually kept one in the kitchen, but I didn't feel brave enough to leave the room and walk through the rest of the house in the dark. I stayed there, my head on the pillow, eyes fixed on the end of the bed. My ears were alert for any sound. My pulse slowed and the tension in my shoulders eased a bit. Maybe it was just stress. Maybe I had half woken from a weird dream and confused it with reality. A few minutes passed, or maybe longer. I started to feel drowsy and my eyelids got heavy. Then I heard a soft click from the hallway. It sounded like a door latch. My eyes shot open. I focused on that direction, but I couldn't see much. I held my breath. The air felt thick. I listened. I heard another faint click, or maybe a subtle scraping noise. I sat up, swung my legs off the bed, and planted my feet on the floor. My heart started pounding again. I couldn't stay there doing nothing. I wanted to see what was happening. I got up and walked to the bedroom door. I stood still for a second. My hand hovered over the doorknob. I opened it slowly, pulling it toward me. It made a small squeak. I peered into the hallway. It was pitch black. I waited, listening. There were no footsteps, no breathing sounds, no other hints of a person nearby. I crept forward, letting my eyes adjust to the dark. The hallway led to the living room on the left and the small guest bathroom on the right. I reached the bathroom first. I leaned inside, feeling around for the light switch, but I already guessed it wouldn't work. I flicked it anyway. No light. I smelled the usual hint of disinfectant. Everything felt the same as always, except for the darkness. I stepped out and moved to the living room. The living room was slant. The curtains were closed, blocking the moonlight. I could barely make out the shape of the couch and the coffee table. I paused near the wall, trying to decide if I should open the curtains to let in some light. Part of me wanted to see my surroundings. Another part of me was afraid of standing in front of the window in case something was outside, watching me. It seemed paranoid, but I couldn't help the thoughts racing through my head. I turned toward the kitchen. My plan was to grab the flashlight from the drawer near the fridge. It was only about 10 steps away, but each step felt too loud and each second felt too long. I made my way to the kitchen, keeping one hand on the wall to guide myself. When I reached the counter, I felt for the drawer. Hand handle opened it and fumbled inside. My fingertips found the flashlight's metal body. I grabbed it, clicking the rubber button on the end. The flashlight beam hit the wall and I exhaled with relief. A simple beam of light made me feel more in control. I swept it around the kitchen. Everything was normal. The sink was empty, the counters were clean, no signs of intruders. I walked back into the living room with the flashlight. I shined it around the coffee table, the couch, the TV stand. Nothing seemed out of place. I checked the front door. It was locked. I tested the handle. It felt secure. I walked to the hallway and aimed the flashlight down its length. The beam revealed the closed bedroom door at the end. I stepped carefully, keeping the light steady. I glanced to the side and saw the door to the guest bedroom. It was closed too. I recalled hearing a click, so I considered checking it. My fingers gripped the knob and I turned it. The door opened and I shined the light inside. The bed was unmade. Same as always, the closet door was closed. There was nothing strange. I shut the door again. I headed for my bedroom, shining the light inside. The blanket was half on the bed, half on the floor. My stomach tightened. I was sure I left it on the bed when I got up. I remembered climbing out from under it. Not throwing it off, I lifted the beam of light to the pillow. The pillow was on the floor too. Near the foot of the bed, it looked out of place as if someone had ripped it away. I felt a jolt of panic in my chest. Something had moved the pillow and the blanket while I was in the kitchen. My arms felt tense and my legs felt weak. I forced myself to walk in. I scanned the corners of the room behind the door. Even under the bed, I didn't see anyone or anything unusual. I touched the pillow on the floor. It was cold to the touch, which was odd because it had been under my head minutes ago. I picked it up and placed it back on the bed. I looked at the blanket on the floor. It had a few wrinkles near the corner, almost like a hand had gripped it. My mouth felt dry and my throat tightened. I grabbed the blanket, keeping the flashlight pointed at the bed. I put the blanket back on top. I didn't want to go back to sleep in that room, but I also felt too afraid to sit in the dark anywhere else in the house, at least here. I had a single room to defend if needed. I told myself that maybe there was a logical explanation. Maybe something fell. Maybe I had left the blanket in a precarious position. It didn't calm me much, but I tried to keep it in mind. I sat on the edge of the bed with the flashlight in my lap, shining it around every so often to make sure nothing was moving. My mind raced with questions about About the power outage, about how my phone died, about why the blanket had moved. I considered calling the police, but I had no working phone and I didn't want to run outside to the car for a charger. I thought about waking a neighbor, but I didn't know them well and it was the middle of the night. I decided to wait. I told myself I'd keep the flashlight on until the sun rose that way. I could see if anything happened. The beam started to flicker. After about 10 minutes, I tapped the side of the flashlight, hoping it was just a loose connection. The flicker stopped and the steady light came back. I felt a small wave of relief. Time passed slowly. My eyes grew heavy and my body felt drained. Every noise put me on edge. I heard the house settling. I heard soft pops from the wooden beams. I even heard my own heartbeat. I kept the flashlight pointing at the foot of the bed. The blanket was still. The pillow stayed in place at some point. The flashlight flickered again. This time it went out completely. I clicked the button several times, shaking it lightly. No response. The battery must have died. I sat there in the dark, telling myself to stay awake until dawn. I wasn't sure how many hours that would take. I felt a sudden shift in the mattress. It was slight, but I noticed the change in pressure. My body froze. I pressed my hands against the bed to confirm what I felt. The mattress dipped on the opposite side near the foot. I heard a faint rustle. It sounded like fabric against the sheets. My scalp tingled and my hands trembled. I slid backward on the bed, pressing my back against the headboard. I tried to see movement, but it was too dark. I felt the presence of something on the mattress, but I couldn't see it. The next few seconds felt like an hour. I heard a soft sound like air moving. Then the mattress rose up again, and the weight disappeared. My breathing came in quick bursts. I realized I was gripping the sheet so tightly that my knuckles hurt. I wanted to run, but I stayed frozen. I heard a scrape near the bedroom door, like something brushing against it. Then the handle rattled. My heart hammered. I held my breath. The handle stopped moving and the door stayed shut. I waited for something else to happen. But the house went quiet. Nothing pulled on the blanket. Nothing tugged at my feet. I stayed sitting up, refusing to lie down again. Minutes passed. I stared into the dark, hearing only the rush of blood in my ears. My muscles ached from tension. At some point, my eyes drifted to the window. I noticed a faint glow outside. Dawn was close. My body felt shaky, but I stood up and walked around the bed, feeling my way to the window. I pulled the curtain aside and saw the first light of morning. I had made it through the night. I waited until it was bright enough to see around the room without a flashlight. Then I opened my bedroom door, checking the hallway in daylight. The power was still out. I tested the switches again. No luck. I grabbed my phone from the nightstand and tried turning it on one more time. But the battery was still dead. I put on some clothes in a hurry and walked to the living room. Everything looked the same as during the night. The blanket on the couch was untouched. The pillows on the chairs were in place. I unbolted the front door and stepped outside. I felt relief as I saw my surroundings in the morning light. I could see other houses, the parked cars, and the quiet street. I realized how tense my shoulders were, so I shook them out. I walked to my car, plugged my phone into the charger, and waited. After a minute, I turned it on. It booted up normally. I checked the time. It was just past 700. I felt an urge to call my girlfriend, but I knew she was busy on her trip. I drove around the block to clear my head. Passing by the power lines, I saw no sign of maintenance. I circled back home and decided to check the breaker box. I found it in the garage. All the switches were in the correct position. I flipped each one off and on again. When I walked back into the house, I heard the hum of the refrigerator. The power was back on. I tested the hallway light and it worked. Everything seemed normal again. I walked to the bedroom. The bed looked rumpled, the pillow still had a slight indentation from my head. The blanket was on top right where I'd placed it before dawn. I didn't see any footprints or obvious signs of a break-in. My mind tried to figure out if someone had really been in the house. I had no evidence there. Were no open windows, no damaged doors, no items missing, but I knew what I felt. I stayed quiet for a moment, standing there in my bedroom. I felt tired, my eyes were dry, my head ached. I rubbed my face and reminded myself that no one died. I was still in one piece. There were no injuries or broken things still. My gut told me I hadn't imagined everything. Something had pulled that blanket and something had rested on the mattress with me. I decided I needed a break from the house. I packed a bag with a change of clothes, my phone charger, and some basic items. I locked up and left, planning to stay at a hotel for at least one night. I didn't have the courage to remain alone in that house. I didn't know if it would happen again. I just knew I couldn't handle another night like that. I started the engine, checked my phone for directions, and drove away. As I left the driveway, I glanced at the bedroom window. The curtains were still parted from when I'd looked outside. I couldn't see anything, but I had a strange feeling that something was there. Watching, my stomach turned and I pressed the gas pedal. I told myself I'd come back later, maybe in the afternoon, maybe with a friend, but not alone and not at night. I kept driving until the house was out of sight, trying to block the memory of the blanket being pulled in that faint pressure on the mattress. Even though I was out of the house, I felt those sensations on my skin. It would probably take more than distance to make me forget. I just hoped I wouldn't wake up in the future to that same slow tug at my feet with no one there to see. I felt the first chill the moment I turned off my drill. My hand was still on the switch and everything around me fell quiet except for that low, raspy sound coming from the far corner. I held my breath because it felt like something was right behind me. My eyes locked on the stack of old boxes near the back wall. The whisper was faint at first, like someone exhaling. Words they didn't want me to hear. My skin prickled and the small hairs on my arms stood up. I stared at those boxes, trying to make sense of the noise I pulled out. My phone tapped the flashlight and aimed the beam at the corner. The whisper stopped. All I could hear was my own breathing echoing in the refurbished basement. I stood there, my flashlight shining on cardboard boxes with faded labels, wondering if I was just tired or if I had actually heard something. I inherited this house from my grandfather last month. He always kept the basement off limits. He told me there was nothing worth seeing down there. The place was damp, filled with cobwebs, and had a single naked light bulb hanging from the ceiling. I decided to clean it up and turn it into a workable space. I'm a handyman by trade, and I like having a proper workshop for my side projects. When I moved in, I spent the first week hauling junk out, scrubbing mold off the walls and pulling out old nails. From broken shelves, I replaced the single light bulb with a row of fluorescent tubes. I sealed any cracks and painted the concrete floor. I wanted the place to look brighter, so I installed new paneling along one wall. I also rearranged some of my grandfather's leftover stuff. He had these dusty cardboard boxes filled with documents, old tools, and magazines. I put them in the corner, stacked in neat rows, and figured I'd go through them later. The weird whisper started after I wrapped up my first day of work in the basement. I flicked off my circular saw, and I heard a noise like a breathy word. It sounded like it came from behind the boxes. I remember stepping toward that corner, the saw's blade still winding down. I didn't hear it again that day, so I shrugged it off. I assumed it was a hiss of air escaping from the pipes in the walls. The house is old and the plumbing is outdated. Strange noises happen all the time, but I felt uneasy. I know that feeling when the air seems to change and you become aware of your heartbeat. That's how it felt. I decided to keep an eye on it the next day. I was sanding a wooden shelf and listening to music once again. The moment I shut off the sander, I heard the same faint whisper. It was soft, but it rose just enough to catch my attention. It felt like a shape in the corner of my vision, something I couldn't see straight on. I walked over to the boxes, rested a hand on top of the nearest one, and waited for my eyes to adjust to the dimmer area behind them. I didn't see anything. I didn't smell anything unusual. There was a stale odor in the air. But that's normal for an old basement. Then I took out my phone, turned on the flashlight, and scanned each box. Nothing jumped out at me. I stayed there for a good minute, trying to slow my breathing and listen. No sound at all. I flipped my phone's flashlight off, and the whisper didn't come back right away. So I went back to my work, a bit on edge, but still thinking it might be a draft or something else. I decided not to mention it to anyone. I figured I could solve it myself the next few days. I tore out a section of old shelving. I cut new boards, measured everything, and installed a new workspace. Each time I stopped a power tool, I would pause and listen. Sometimes I didn't hear anything. Other times I heard that slow, rasping sound. It always came from the same corner. I walked there with my phone light on, and it always stopped when I shined the light. Eventually, I got frustrated. I didn't like feeling jumpy in my own home, so I set up one of those stand-up work lights and aimed it at the corner, hoping the bright light would eliminate any shadows for a day or two. I didn't hear anything. I thought maybe I had fixed the issue, like maybe the whisper was something to do with the old wiring or the new fixtures. Then on a Thursday afternoon, I shut off my table saw and the whisper was right there, closer than ever. It sent a jolt through me. My mouth went dry, my hands felt clammy. I spun around. Looking at that same spot, the overhead work light was shining right on the boxes, but I swore I saw a slight flicker, like a shadow passing over them. I yanked the plug on the saw and walked straight across the room, my boots echoing on the concrete. Right when I took out my phone to turn on the flashlight, the whisper vanished again. At that point, I felt like I was losing my mind. I considered the possibility that I might be imagining the sound. I hadn't been sleeping well. I'd been working long hours trying to fix up the rest of the house. Sometimes my mind plays tricks on me when I'm tired, but the feeling wasn't going away. My arms tingled, my pulse was fast and heavy in my chest. I opened one of the boxes, rummaged through old tool catalogs and scraps of newspaper. Nothing out of the ordinary. I placed my ear near the wall, thinking maybe there was a gap to the outside. Sometimes wind blowing through a crevice can sound like a whisper. But I didn't feel a breeze. The basement was still. The air felt thick. That same evening, I carried my toolbox upstairs. As I climbed each step, I heard something behind me. It was a murmur, low and rough, and I thought I heard my last name, Carter, trailing off in a breathy voice. I actually stopped halfway up and turned around. The basement lights were still on. I looked at the corner from the stairs. I didn't see anything, but my legs felt weak. My stomach dropped. I tried to swallow, but my throat was tight. The voice didn't repeat itself, but I still stood there for a few seconds, straining my ears. I felt my heart beating in my neck. Eventually, I rushed upstairs and closed the door. My palm was sweaty against the doorknob. That night, I sat in the living room trying to calm myself. I flipped through channels on the TV. But my mind kept going back to that sound. I remembered how my grandfather barely used the basement. I remembered how he told me not to bother going. Down there, I wondered if he had heard the same whisper. I didn't have any answers. My entire body felt tense, like I was on constant alert. Around 10 at night, I decided to go back down. I wanted to see if the whisper would be there when the house was quiet. I grabbed a flashlight plus the phone. I also took a small digital recorder from my toolbox. I thought I could capture the sound if it happened again. I stood at the top of the basement steps, flicked the light switch, and the fluorescent tubes hummed on. I walked down, each step creaking under my weight. My chest felt tight, my hand shook a bit. When I got near the bottom, I placed the digital recorder on my workbench and clicked the record button. The basement sounded empty at first, just that faint electric hum from the lights. I turned off the overhead lights to see if I could trigger the whisper by cutting power to something as soon as I switched them off. The basement got dark except for the glow of my phone. That was when I heard a long exhale, like someone pushing air through their teeth. My heart was hammering. I aimed my phone's flashlight toward the boxes the whisper cut out. I waited in that darkness, phone light trained on the corner. My breathing was loud in my ears. I switched the overhead lights on again. I listened for the next minute and heard nothing but my own movement. When I stopped the recorder and played it back, I caught a faint, garbled sound after the lights went off. It was low and muffled. It made the hair on my arm stand up. I couldn't make out words, but it matched the pattern of the whisper I heard. I left the basement that night, locked the door behind me, and slept with the lights on in my bedroom. I don't usually scare easily, but that whisper crawled under my skin. The next day, I had to go down and finish some work. My plan was to install the final set of shelves and move on to another project. I tried to distract myself by focusing on measuring boards and drilling pilot holes. I cranked up the volume on a small radio for a while. The noise of the drill and the music covered up any strange sounds. But when I turned the drill off, the voice was there again, the same low murmur. This time it sounded more distinct. It still had that eerie tone, but I thought I heard my last name repeated twice. Carter. Carter. It was faint, but my brain picked it up immediately. I felt my forehead damp with sweat. My pulse raced, my hands trembled as I set the drill on the workbench. I stood still, refusing to look at the corner. My mouth felt dry. I swallowed a few times, then forced myself to turn around slowly. I walked toward the corner, keeping my phone's flashlight off to see if the whisper continued. It did. It was a soft exhalation that sounded like someone struggling to get words out. My entire body tensed. My chest felt heavy. My mind was screaming at me to leave, but I wanted to know if there was something physically there when I was a few steps away from the boxes. My phone vibrated in my pocket. The noise startled me so badly that I nearly dropped it. The whisper immediately stopped. My phone screen lit up with a spam call, and the corner was momentarily illuminated. I saw nothing except dusty boxes and the smooth concrete wall behind them. I retreated, my breath shaky. The tension in my shoulders felt like a knot under my skin. I pressed my hand to my chest, trying to slow my heartbeat. I decided to keep working. But I wore earbuds and played music loud enough to block out any faint whispers. Every now and then, I would glance over my shoulder. I didn't hear anything for a couple of hours. Then I wrapped up for the day and headed upstairs. On the third step, I heard a voice call out, "Carter." It was clearer than before, and it felt closer to my back. I froze, my skin broke out in goosebumps. I gripped the handrail so hard my knuckles turned white. There was a slight pressure in the air, like something was behind me waiting. I forced myself to look over my shoulder. I saw the empty basement. I saw my new shelves, my tools, and those same stacked boxes. No shadows were moving, no shapes were lurking, but the voice lingered in my head. My heart pounded against my rib cage. I turned and ran up the rest of the stairs, my boots thewing on each step. I slammed the door behind me. At that point, I considered moving out. The whisper made me uncomfortable in my own house. I thought about paying someone else to finish the basement project. But I also felt that I should figure out what was going on. I couldn't ignore the fact that the whisper always started when the power tools went off or when I cut the lights. I wondered if the boxes held something that triggered these noises the next morning. I went down there again, phone in hand, and started opening every box. I rummaged through old receipts, broken saw, blades, yellowed newspapers, metal junk, and some old letters. I found some keys that didn't fit any doors I knew. I turned the boxes upside down, shook out all the contents, and put everything in a pile on a folding table. Throughout this process, I kept the lights on and I didn't hear any whisper. The basement felt calm, just me rustling paper and clanking old metal. Parts when I finished, I sat on a crate, stared at the mess I'd made, and listened. The hum of the fluorescent tubes was steady, no other noises drifted in. I took a deep breath, turned off the overhead lights, and waited in the dark. My phone was on the table face down and the screen was off. The basement was pitch black except for the faint glow from the gap under the door at the top of the stairs. I heard my heartbeat in my ears. I sat there for maybe 30 seconds, not moving. That was when the whisper came. It was slow, dragging out each syllable of my last name, Cartier. My scalp tingled, my stomach lurched. I wanted to turn on my phone flashlight, but I made myself sit there to see if I could trace the source. It felt like the sound was right in front of me. The air tasted stale, my breathing got shallow, and I could barely sit still. Then I stood up. The whisper got softer but kept going. I couldn't tell if it was one voice or several. It sounded like a single whisper, but it had a shaky quality to it. My nerves were on edge. I fumbled for my phone, tapped the flashlight button, and aimed it around the corner. Was empty. The boxes were empty. Everything was where I left it. The whisper stopped the second the light hit the back wall. I didn't last another minute down there. I rushed to the stairs, taking them two at a time. While I climbed, I heard a final ragged whisper. Carter, my legs almost buckled, but I kept going until I was out of the basement. The door closed behind me with a loud thud. My hands were shaking, my shirt stuck to my back with sweat. I felt cold, even though my body was hot with adrenaline. I leaned against the wall in the hallway, heart pounding like I had just sprinted a mile. That was the moment I decided I was done working in the basement alone. I locked the basement door and left my tools downstairs. I haven't been back there since. Whenever I passed by the door, I feel a pull, like something is waiting for me to cut the power again. Waiting to whisper my name in the dark. I can't explain it. And I'm not sure I want to try. All I know is that the corner where my grandfather kept his old boxes seems to hold a presence I can't face right now. And that voice calling my last name still echoes in my mind. Every time the house goes quiet, I never expected to feel uneasy in my own bedroom, especially during something as ordinary as a video call. But that's exactly what has happened over the last few weeks. My coworkers keep telling me they see a shape behind me in the camera view. I don't see it when I look around. I notice nothing but the usual walls and furniture yet. Each night a soft tapping comes from my closed door. I call out, wait for an answer, and hear only my own breathing. I used to think it was nothing. Now I'm sure it's something, I don't know what. But it feels real and I can't ignore it anymore. I work a lot of late nights because my team spans different time zones. We decided on a schedule where I host a video conference around 11 at night. It's usually me in my chair, laptop open, overhead light on my camera faces me and the door behind me which leads into a short hallway. I used to find these calls convenient because I could finish them, log off and go straight to bed. Now I dread them. They're the time of day when I feel a chill in the air right around the moment I hear that first gentle knock. The knock started about 2 weeks ago. At first I assumed it was the plumbing or maybe something outside in the street, but it always came from the same spot, the door behind me on the left side. I'd get up, open the door, and glance into the hallway. I'd see my jacket hanging on the hallway hook, an old lamp, and the blank walls leading to the living room, nothing else. I'd listen for sounds of footsteps or shuffling, nothing. Then I'd go back to my desk feeling silly, but the pattern repeated every night almost at the same point in the call. It's always around 11:15 or 11:20. Never exactly on the dot, but close enough that I notice after a few days. I mentioned it to my co-workers. We were chatting after we wrapped up the main discussion. I joked about hearing weird noises at night. To my surprise, one of them said, "Hey, actually, I thought I saw someone behind you yesterday. I could have sworn a figure moved near the door." My stomach tightened. I had no idea how to respond. Another coworker chimed in. "I noticed that too. I thought it was just your roommate." I told them I live alone. I could hear them all pause. Then they started talking over each other, trying to figure out if they were mistaken. I told them the door stays closed, but maybe the camera created a shadow or something. They didn't insist, but they kept exchanging glances on the call. I ended that session pretty fast. Claiming I was tired that night, I tried to keep a bright light on in the hallway. To see if anything appeared, I set a small lamp on a stool, aiming it toward the door. I figured if someone or something was out there, I'd see a shadow the moment I opened the door. By 11:15. We were in the middle of a discussion on a new project. My coworker asked me about a design detail. While I was answering, I heard the faint tapping again. It sounded like knuckles on wood, but softer than usual. It took every bit of willpower to keep talking as if everything was normal. My voice trembled a little. I saw my coworker's eyebrow go up on the screen. I felt my neck tense. My shirt felt tight at the collar. My arms got goosebumps. I couldn't focus on the conversation. My coworker was waiting for an answer, and I was busy staring at my door, waiting for it to open or move. It stayed shut. The tapping didn't repeat. I forced myself to speak. "Yeah, let's include that in the next build," I managed to say immediately. The coworker asked, "Is something behind you?" I spun around. The door looked normal, but I swore I caught a flicker of movement through my laptop's camera display. It could have been the lighting or my own reflection. I shut the call down. 2 minutes later, pretending there was a connectivity issue when the call ended, I decided to investigate. I got up. My legs felt unsteady. I could feel my heart pounding in my temples. I reached for the doorknob, turned it, and opened the door quickly. The hallway light was on, shining directly toward my bedroom door. Nothing moved. The small lamp was still on the stool. The hallway was empty. I walked around, checking every corner. I checked the living room, the kitchen, the bathroom, all empty. The windows were locked. I live on the second floor, so it's not easy to get in from outside unless someone used a ladder, but I saw no signs of forced entry. I came back to my bedroom and forced myself to calm down. I got under the covers and tried to sleep. Every slight creak in the apartment made me jump. The following day, I spent the entire morning looking for explanations. I tested the apartment's air vents. I tapped on the walls to see if there were any loose boards. I even placed my ear to the bedroom door, knocking in different spots to match the exact sound. It always sounded slightly different from the knocks I'd heard at night. The real knock sounded softer and lighter, almost deliberate. I tried ignoring it by telling myself it was just the building settling, but that excuse wasn't convincing anymore. That evening, I got a text from a coworker. "Dude, "Was that your neighbor or something behind you yesterday?" I replied that I didn't see anything. He sent me a screenshot he took during the call in the image. I'm talking with a tense expression on my face in the corner near the door. There's a dark shape that could be a person's shoulder or part of a silhouette. It's blurry, but it's there. My first thought was to toss my phone and forget about it instead. I stared at that image for a long minute, trying to see if it was just a trick of the camera angle. But the shape had a distinctive outline that didn't look random. My scalp felt tight. I rubbed my forehead and tried to think of how that shape could appear: a piece of furniture, a reflection. I don't keep anything tall enough near the door to create that outline. That night I made sure to lock my bedroom door from the inside before the call at 11:00 p.m. And I logged on as usual. 4 other people joined. We spent a while talking about work items. I kept glancing at the corners of my screen, checking to see if anything appeared. Part of me wanted to turn off my camera and use only audio. But I needed to show my face or my co-workers would suspect I was too freaked out to concentrate. Finally, around 11:20, that tapping came back. This time it was a bit louder, like something tapping with an object instead of a knuckle. I felt my pulse jump and I stopped talking mid-sentence. My co-workers got quiet. One of them typed in the chat, "Knocking again." I nodded, feeling my mouth go dry. The knocks came again, 4 quick taps, then silence. I told them I needed to check it out. I got up from my chair, walked to the door, and put my hand on the lock. It was still engaged. I slowly unlocked it and pulled the door open. The hallway was dark because I had turned off that extra lamp, thinking too much light might create weird shadows. I flipped the hallway switch on. Nothing. No movement, no sounds. My co-worker typed on the chat, "We see you walking into the hallway. Anything there?" I answered out loud, "No. There's nothing here." I heard another co-worker say, "We saw something move behind you just now." My heart pounded so hard I felt it in my ears. I spun around. My bedroom door was still halfway open and I could see my desk and the laptop screen. No one stood in my room, but my co-workers' faces on the screen looked worried. They all insisted they saw a dark figure slipped behind me while I was facing the hallway. I stepped back into the bedroom and closed the door. At that point, I told them I needed to end the call because I wasn't feeling well. Everyone nodded. They didn't argue. They seemed as shaken as I was. I ended the call, slammed my laptop shut, and stayed on my bed trying to gather my thoughts. My breath came in quick gasps. My skin felt clammy. My mind raced with possibilities. Could a neighbor have a key? Could someone be sneaking in from the window? I got up, grabbed a flashlight, and searched the whole apartment again. I opened closets, checked under the bed, behind the couch, behind doors. I found no sign of any person. It was just me in that apartment after finishing my sweep. I sat on the couch for a while, lights on everywhere, and tried to settle down. Over the next few days, I tried to avoid the subject. I still had to do the nightly calls. My boss insisted on it because it was the only time our schedules lined up. I didn't tell him about the KNX. I just said I had some personal stuff going on during each video conference. I kept the door behind me locked. I closed all the blinds in the hallway and I set up my laptop so the background was as bright as possible. I thought maybe a bright light would help me see anything moving back there still. The knocks continued. Sometimes they were faint, sometimes laugh. My co-workers kept noticing movement. Even the boss asked me during one call, "Is there something going on in your apartment?" I said. I wasn't sure. I tried laughing it off, but I'm sure my face showed I was nervous last Thursday. I decided I'd record the call. I set up a screen recorder to capture both my screen and my webcam. I wanted to see if the recording would show anything around 11:10 p.m. The knocks started again. This time they were very soft, almost scratching. I felt my heart rate spike. Immediately I got a bit dizzy and I had to steady myself against the desk. My coworkers noticed. They said, "Man, you look like you saw a ghost." I forced a laugh, but it sounded fake to me. I told them I'm fine, just exhausted. The KNX went on for a few seconds, paused, then started again. I excused myself and got up, walking toward the door. My hand shook as I reached for the knob. I couldn't bring myself to open it. This time I just pressed my ear to the wood. I heard a short shuffle, like someone was adjusting their stance on the other side, then silence. My co-workers were staring at me through the screen. One of them said, "Maybe call the cops," but I didn't want to make a big deal over something that might be unexplained or harmless. Also, I wasn't sure I wanted to deal with that hassle. I brushed it off and told them I'd handle it. I locked the door again, sat down, and kept the call going until we finished. After we disconnected, I checked the recording. I watched it for several minutes, paying close attention to the door area. There was a moment right around the time I pressed my ear to the wood where the door seemed to shake slightly, as if someone on the other side was pulling on the handle or leaning on the door. I didn't notice that while it was happening, probably because I was too nervous, but on the footage it's clear that the door moves. Seeing that made the hair on my arm stand on end. I shut my laptop and took a hot shower, trying to clear my head. The next day, I bought a small security camera and mounted it in the hallway facing my bedroom door. I linked it to an app on my phone so I could monitor any activity that night. I started the video call as usual. The camera was rolling in the hallway, capturing the door around 11:15. The KNX came. I let my co-workers talk among themselves while I checked my phone. The hallway feed showed the door. Nobody stood there, no shape, no figure, but I heard the knocks. The screen showed an empty space in front of my door, yet the sound of tapping was coming from that exact spot. My stomach turned. It felt unnatural to see nothing in the feed. While hearing that noise, I ended the call. Early told everyone I wasn't feeling well, then went to the hallway. I kept the security camera on. I placed my phone on a small table so I could still see the live feed. I walked up to the door from the hallway side, pressed my palm against it, and tapped back. I heard my taps echo into the bedroom. Then from the bedroom side, something tapped 3 times. My phone's camera still showed just me standing alone in the hallway door in front of me. No one else, but I felt the vibration of those 3 taps pass through the wood. I froze. I could feel my palms sweating. My head felt light. I stepped back. The door stayed closed. I realized I'd left my laptop open on my desk inside the bedroom, so the camera on. The laptop was probably seeing my empty chair. I moved back into the bedroom, checking every corner again. I sat in my chair and looked at the laptop screen. It showed the security camera feed from the hallway, which was still empty. I felt stuck in a loop, checking everything, seeing nothing, hearing everything. This nightly pattern hasn't stopped. It's still happening every time the knocks come. I check. There's never anyone there now. I'm on edge all the time. My co-workers keep asking about it. They don't know how to help. Some suggest calling a landlord or a locksmith to change the locks. Others suggest installing more cameras. I've tried all that. The locks are fine. The cameras capture nothing but an empty hallway and a closed door still. The knocks continue still. There are glimpses on my co-workers' screens that look like a shape standing behind me near the door. Just out of focus. I can't sleep well anymore. I keep all the lights on. My appetite is shot and I'm tired. I keep expecting to see someone or something show up at any moment. But so far, it never happens in plain sight. It's only in these small clues, the knocks, The screenshots, the shaky door, the tapping response, there's no trail of footprints or open windows. I feel like I've checked everything a dozen times yet. I don't find a single piece of solid evidence that a person is physically entering my apartment. I've tried telling myself that if no one has harmed me by now, maybe they don't intend to. I tell myself it's just some phenomenon I can't explain, but that's not comforting every night at 11:00 p.m. I sit at my desk, log into the meeting, and wait with my nerves on edge. I keep my gaze half on the screen, half on the door. The knocks always come. My coworkers always see something, and I can't do anything about it. I just wait for the knocks to end, then I investigate the hallway and I find no one. Then I go to bed feeling that tightness in my chest. I stare at the ceiling until I pass out from sheer exhaustion. I'm still looking for answers, but right now I don't have a solid plan. All I have is the knowledge that every night I'll hear those taps. I'll stand up and check. I'll see nothing. My coworkers will tell me they see a shadow. I'll capture more strange screenshots, and then the next day I'll sit at my desk again, bracing myself for whatever might be waiting outside that door. It doesn't matter if the door is locked or if I leave it open, the knocks keep coming. The shadow keeps appearing, and I have no idea when or if it will ever stop. I heard the first crash of thunder while I was on the front porch wiping my boots on a rag. The sky had been clear an hour earlier, so I didn't bother checking the forest. Then the wind picked up and the rain came down in heavy sheets. It felt like a switch. Switch had been flipped. The lake went from calm to violent in the blink of an eye. I stood there thinking I should probably get inside before the lightning got worse, but I couldn't take my eyes off the water. It was late, probably close to midnight, and the only light was from the flashes that lit up everything in sudden bursts. That's when I noticed a shape out there far from the shore. I wasn't sure if I was seeing things because the rain messed with my vision, but after the next FL flash I saw it again, and it looked like a person standing in the water. I felt my pulse quicken. The storm made it hard to see more than a few yards ahead. But the shape was well beyond that, maybe 100 yards out. My mind started racing. Nobody should be out there at that hour, especially in this kind of weather. I leaned over the porch rail and squinted. The next lightning strike lit up the entire lake. The figure was still there, but closer. That made no sense to me. I hadn't seen any movement. I hadn't seen anybody swimming or wading. It was just closer. It looked hum. I thought I could make out shoulders and a head. But the storm made it impossible to be sure. I stepped backward and bumped into the side table by the door. The sound startled me because everything else was drowned out by thunder and rain. My clothes were already damp from the sideways spray. I wanted to get a better look, so I grabbed a flashlight from inside. When I turned it on it barely cut through the darkness. The air was so thick with rain that the beam couldn't reach more than a few feet. I flicked it around, trying to catch a reflection in the water. Nothing. I tried pointing it toward where I had seen the figure, but there was just darkness and the constant downfall. Lightning hit again and my stomach tightened. The figure was closer still, maybe halfway to the shore. The water around it was churning, but I couldn't see any splashing from arms or legs. It was like it floated forward between flashes. My hands shook a little, and I gripped the flashlight so I wouldn't drop it. I tasted something bitter in my mouth, a mix of fear and the adrenaline rush. I tried to tell myself it might just be a trick of the light, but I couldn't make sense of it. I backed into the cabin. My heart pounded. I stood in the living area, feeling my pulse in my neck. The wind howled against the windows. The cabin's beams creaked under the gusts. I flicked a lantern on, setting it on the small mumble in the center of the room. Its glow was weak but comforting. I could still see the lake through the window every few seconds. Another flash lit the world outside. I caught glimpses of that shape inching closer. I decided to lock the door even though I wasn't sure how that would help if someone was truly out there. My gut told me something was off. I wanted to call out. Maybe ask if they needed help, but the pounding rain and thunder would drown my voice, and a part of me didn't want to draw attention to myself. I realized I was breathing through my mouth, my throat tight. The next lightning strike flashed again, and the figure was only about 30 yards out. I swear I saw part of a face. It was too dark to see details, but it looked like eyes. My skin crawled and I felt goosebumps on my arms. I clenched my jaw to keep my teeth from chattering. I stepped back from the window trying to think straight. My mind jumped to worst-case scenarios. Maybe it was some drifter who got stuck in the storm, or maybe it was just debris in the water that looked like a person. But deep down I knew it moved too intentionally for that. I paced around the cabin, running my hand through my hair. I could hear every branch outside whipping around in the wind. The roof rattled in a way I hadn't heard before. I remembered the caretaker telling me the cabin was sturdy enough, but it groaned like it was under real strain. There was a short hallway leading to the bedroom. I flicked the light switch, but the power was out. Only the lantern and an occasional flash of lightning lit the inside. I felt my way through the darkness and found the bedroom window. It overlooked the side of the lake. At an angle, I brushed aside the curtain and waited for the next flash. When it came, I saw the shore water was slapping against the rocks. In that instant of brightness, I spotted the figure again, even closer now. It was maybe 10 feet out. It was definitely a person. The top of the head and shoulders were above the water. They weren't thrashing or swimming. It was like they glided with each burst of lightning. I let the curtain fall back. My body felt tense. I didn't know if I should hide or go outside and confront whoever was there. I grabbed my phone. No signal. That wasn't surprising. This place rarely had a decent connection. And the storm made it worse. My thoughts raced. I considered if I had anything I could use to defend myself if needed. There was a rusty hatchet on the back porch that I used for chopping kindling. I realized I'd have to go back outside in the storm to get it. I wasn't thrilled about that idea, but I also didn't want to stand here with nothing but a flashlight in my shaky hands. If this figure reached the shore, I walked to the front door, bracing myself for the wind and rain. I opened it, and a gust nearly knocked me back a step. Rain pelted my face like pins and needles. I held onto the doorframe and made my way across the small porch. The steps were slick. Water dripped off the roof, creating a constant splash. I forced myself to look out at the lake again. Another lightning strike lit up the area. The figure was gone from that spot. I felt a jolt in my stomach. I scanned the water, but I couldn't. See anything? The darkness closed in again. I moved along the side of the cabin toward the back. My clothes were soaked by the time I reached the small tool shed built against the wall. Everything around me roared: the storm, the trees, the lakes, waves. I fumbled around in the dim light of my flashlight until I found the hatchet. Its handle felt cold. I clutched it tight, my palms slick with water and sweat on my way back. I heard what sounded like footsteps on wet gravel. It was faint, but it made my hair stand on end. It could have been a trick of the storm, but it sounded too close. I stopped trying to calm my breathing so I could listen. Another flash, another boom in that momentary light. I thought I saw a shape near the side of the cabin just a few yards away. I swung my flashlight toward it, but the darkness returned too fast. I stepped back until I pressed against the cabin wall. Hatchet raised my heart, Hamed in my chest. I waited, breathing hard, scanning for any movement. The thunder rolled again, echoing across the lake. Rain dripped off the roof, hitting my head and shoulders. I could taste the salt of my own sweat. I stood like that for what felt like minutes. Though it was probably just a few seconds, another lightning strike illuminated the yard. I saw wet ground, the outlines of a few trees and the edge of the shore behind them. No one was there. I edged along the wall, heading back to the front porch. Once inside, I shut the door and locked it again. I could barely think straight. But I forced myself to focus. I took the lantern and moved it closer to the window, hoping the light would help me see outside better. I stood there, gripping the hatchet in one hand, the flashlight in the other. I was shivering, partly from the cold, partly from pure tension. I leaned toward the window, trying to see if there was any sign of that figure. Another bright flash split the darkness, followed by a huge clap of thunder. The windows rattled, and I saw something by the shore. It was crouched near a group of rocks, maybe half hidden by them. I couldn't tell if it was looking at me, but it looked like a person hunched over, arms pulled in tight. I couldn't see details, just the shape. I moved to the side, pressing my forehead against the glass, trying to get a better angle. My breath fogged the window. I wiped it with my sleeve. I wanted to see if the figure was still moving toward me or if it was just staying put. Another flash. This time the figure was standing again, facing the cabin. I caught a glimpse of something reflective where the eyes would be. My chest tightened. That reflection could have just been water or something else, but it felt like eyes. I thought about calling out to see if the person needed help, but my mouth felt dry and my throat felt tight. My voice would have cracked if I had tried to yell. I looked at the lantern, thinking maybe I could place it near the window as a signal. Then I realized I didn't want to signal anyone to come closer. I stepped away from the window and tried to control my breathing. The floor creaked under my feet. I felt a sudden urge to close the curtains and hide, but curiosity and fear kept me at the glass. I needed to see what happened next. The storm saint was still raging. The thunder came in shorter intervals now, like the lightning was hitting closer. Each time I heard the rain hammer the roof and the walls. Every gust of wind made the cabin moan like an old ship. I wondered if I should try to leave, but I only had my truck parked by the narrow dirt road on the other side of the clearing. I'd have to run in the dark and the storm to get to it, and even if I reached it, I'd have to drive on a flooded dirt path that twisted through thick woods. That idea felt even more dangerous, especially if that figure was out there. I didn't want to risk meeting it on foot. I moved away from the window and put the lantern on the table facing the door. The hatchet felt heavy in my hand. My knuckles were white from gripping it. I realized my shoulders were stiff with tension, so I rolled them a bit, trying to ease the tightness. I listened for any sound besides the storm. All I could hear was the wind rain and an occasional crack of branches outside. I decided to check the back window in the bedroom again, just to make sure there wasn't a second approach. I walked slowly down the hallway, stepping carefully on the wooden floor. Each board groaned under my weight at the bedroom window. I pulled the curtain aside and waited for the next flash. The glass was foggy from the temperature difference inside and out. I wiped it with my shirt sleeve. When the lightning came, I saw the leg surface churning. Waves rolled onto the shore. I saw the tree line at the edge of the clearing. I saw the ragged outline of the old boat dock a bit further down. But I didn't see anyone. The figure wasn't on this side. I moved the curtain back and forth a little, looking for any sign of movement. Nothing. I went back to the main room. The cabin lights were still off, but the lantern flame flickered enough to keep the place from total darkness. I wed to the window facing the front again. Another flash, and I saw no one by the rocks this time. I sighed in relief, but I stayed on guard. I scanned the yard, the path, the shoreline. There was no sign of that silhouette. The next flash was a few seconds later, and still nothing. The tension in my chest loosened a bit, but I didn't relax completely. I stood there for a while, listening, watching. The storm kept hammering away. I wondered if maybe the figure had gone back into the water, or maybe it had slipped away into the woods. My imagination played tricks, making me think it could be anywhere. I paced around the room, checking the windows every time lightning flickered. I didn't see anything. The minutes dragged on, the wind howled. I checked my phone again, no service. I tried to calm myself by thinking about logical explanations. Maybe it was just some person who was lost or in shock. Maybe they realized they were at the wrong place as the storm raged. I realized I had to decide what to do for the rest of the night. I wasn't going to sleep. I pulled a chair over to the window and put it in a spot where I could see outside. I set the hatchet on the table next to the lantern within easy reach. I kept the flashlight on my lap. My pants were still damp and I felt clammy in my own clothes. I wanted to change, but I was scared to drop my guard. I just sat there, eyes flicking between the window and the door, waiting for the next flash. Thunder cracked so loud that the walls trembled. I braced myself, half expecting the door to burst open, but nothing happened outside. The rain kept coming. Lightning lit up the cabin interior every other minute like a strobe each time I scanned the yard through the window. Still no figure. I kept telling myself I should at least dry off. I got up once, grabbed a towel from the bathroom and patted down my hair and face. My hands shook every time thunder roared. The storm felt like it was right on top of me. The wind rattled the windows in their frames. Water dripped off the porch eaves in a steady stream each time I wiped my face. I felt new beads of sweat forming on my forehead. After more than an hour, the storm started to ease. The thunder moved farther away and the lightning spaced out. The rain still fell, but it wasn't as heavy. Eventually, I felt safe enough to stand at the window without crouching. I peered outside, looking for any sign of movement. Nothing stirred except the wind and the trees. The lake looked rough, waves slapping the shore, but I didn't see a single shape out there. The reflection of the lantern in the window sometimes played tricks, but I was sure I didn't see anyone now. I stayed on guard for the rest of the night. I didn't dare leave the cabin or open any door around dawn. The rain was just a drizzle. Gray light fell across the lake. The water looked churned up and muddy near the shore. I stepped outside onto the porch, hatchet still in my hand. The ground was slick with mud I heard dripping from the roof. I looked out across the lake. No one was there, no figure, no footprints near the water, just the quiet aftermath of the storm. I walked around the cabin, checking every corner, expecting to find footprints or some sign that someone had come on. Sure, the ground was soaked and covered with leaves and branches torn down by the wind. I couldn't see any obvious disturbance besides the usual storm debris. My truck was still parked where I'd left it. Covered in wet pine needles, I glanced back at the lake one more time. It looked almost calm again. With just a few ripples, I felt exhausted but relieved. My shoulders ached from how tense they'd been all night. I looked around for any sign of where that figure might have gone. I saw nothing. It was like the storm had brought them and then taken them away. I went back inside, set the hatchet on the porch table, and dried off properly. My pulse was still a little fast, but at least I could take a normal breath again. I made some coffee on the small propane stove. I drank it quietly, staring out the window at the lake. The sun started breaking through the clouds, and streaks of light hit the water. Normally, I would have thought it was a beautiful morning, but all I could think about was that silhouette in the water. It had moved closer with every flash, but I never saw it swim. It just kept appearing as if the lightning revealed it in a different spot each time, and then it vanished. I still don't know who or what I saw. Maybe it was just a person disoriented by the storm. Maybe they got spooked and ran on off. There were no kids involved, no one died, and I was the only one in the cabin. But the memory of that night stuck with me. I kept replaying those moments when the lightning flashed and the figure was a few yards closer, just standing there in the water. Every time I think about it, I feel that tightness in my chest again. It was real, whatever it was, and it still makes me feel uneasy whenever a storm rolls in over that lake. I haven't stopped glancing over my shoulder when thunder booms, expecting to see that silhouette creeping closer again, flash by flash. I jolted awake in the middle of the night because something pushed down on the mattress near my feet. It felt like a person sitting right there. My wife was asleep beside me, completely still. And our bedroom door was closed. We live alone, and I knew nobody else should be in the house. I felt my heart hammering. The darkness seemed too heavy, and my mouth felt dry as I stared at the foot of the bed. That's when I caught a glimpse of a blurred shape near my feet. It moved in a way that made no sense, like it floated up without a sound. Then it disappeared into thin air. I couldn't breathe for a moment. I just froze. I slowly reached over and placed my hand on my wife's shoulder. She was still breathing in a deep rhythm, so I whispered her name. She didn't respond. I nudged her a bit, but she stayed asleep. I didn't want to scare her, but I also didn't want to deal with this feeling alone. My hands were sweating. The sensation in my feet lingered, like the mattress was still pressed down. I shifted my legs to see if the shape would return. But nothing happened. I sat up carefully, slid out of bed, and stepped onto the cold wooden floor. I listened for any creaking outside our bedroom. There was nothing. No voices, no footsteps. I looked across the room. We have a small nightlight plugged into the wall near our closet. It gave a faint orange glow, and I could see the outline of our furniture. There was no movement except for my own shadow. My pulse was still racing. I decided to check the hallway. Maybe someone had broken in. Though I couldn't understand how that blurred shape would fit into a regular break-in. Still, I needed a rational explanation. I grabbed the small flashlight I keep by my nightstand. I clicked it on, and the narrow beam of light cut through the darkness. I pushed the bedroom door open, trying not to make too much noise. The door hinges LED out a short squeak. I paused to listen, but I heard no reaction from inside the house. I walked down the hallway, shining the flashlight on the floor and then up at the walls. The hallway was empty. The wooden floor felt cool under my bare feet, and the air smelled a little stale, like it does when windows stay shut for too long. At the end of the hallway, I entered the living room. I scanned around. The furniture looked normal. Couch, coffee table, TV on the stand, no signs of anyone or anything out of place. I checked the front door. It was locked from the inside. I pulled on the handle to confirm it was secure. It didn't budge. I turned to the windows. They were also locked. I stood there listening for any slight sound. My heart was still pounding, and I could hear my own breathing, steady but tense. Still no noise, nothing moved. I went to the kitchen, flipped the light switch, and the bright overhead light flooded the room. It made me squint for a second. I checked the back door, also locked, bolt in place. No broken glass, no open windows. Everything looked normal. My mind raced with questions, but I couldn't find any obvious sign of a break-in or anything else. I walked back through the living room, turned off the kitchen light, and paused near the hallway to see if I heard anything from the bedroom. It stayed quiet. I returned to the bedroom, gently closed the door, and set my flashlight back on the nightstand. My wife was still asleep. She'd shifted onto her side, hugging her pillow. I looked at the foot of the bed again. Everything looked normal under the low nightlight glow. I failed and tried to calm down. Maybe I had a nightmare that felt real. Still, I knew what I felt: the weight on the mattress, the momentary pressure near my legs, and that strange shape. I couldn't shake it. I decided to get back into bed. It took me a while to settle down. My legs felt tight, like every muscle was on guard. My arms were tense, and I couldn't rest my head for more than a few seconds without feeling a surge of panic. I kept imagining that shape appearing again each time I closed my eyes. I felt like something might touch my feet after what felt like a long tip, though. Exhaustion hit me. My thoughts scattered, and I drifted off. I woke up late the next morning. My wife was already in the kitchen making coffee. I sat up and checked my phone. It was almost 9:30. I usually don't sleep that late, but I was worn out. I got up, put on sweatpants and a t-shirt and walked into the kitchen. She greeted me with a smile, then noticed I looked unsettled. She asked if I slept okay. I told her I had a weird dream, but I didn't go into details right away. I poured myself some coffee, took a sip and tried to focus on the warmth I felt. Shaky, she asked me again, what was wrong? I decided to describe exactly what happened. She listened, her eyes widening a bit. Then she shrugged, saying maybe I'd had a very realistic nightmare. She added that she'd never felt anything during the night and she didn't hear me get up. I couldn't argue much because I had no proof. There was no mark on the bed, no footprints, no sign of forced entry. But the memory of that sinking feeling on the mattress kept coming back. And I knew I saw something. It wasn't just a trick of the light. She left it at that and told me she was going to run some errands. I told her I'd stay home and do some work around the house. I spent the afternoon trying to distract myself. I cleaned the living room, organized some books, and swept the floors. I tried to ignore the tingle of anxiety in my stomach every time I passed the bedroom. I glanced inside. Nothing seemed odd in there. Still, I kept remembering that weight on my feet. At one point, I decided to check the attic. We don't store much up there, but I wanted to see if maybe there were signs of an animal or something. I climbed the pull-down ladder and poked my head into the attic space. It was dim, lit by a single bulb hanging from the ceiling. The air was dusty and I coughed a bit. I looked around, a couple of old boxes, some old suitcases, no sign of rodents or other creatures, no footprints or disturbed dust. I stayed up there for a couple of minutes, shining a small flashlight around. It was silent, just stale air and dust particles floating around. Satisfied there was nothing, I climbed down and shut the hatch. When my wife came home, I mentioned the attic check. She just nodded. She asked if I was okay. I said yes. But I didn't feel fully at ease that night. I cooked us a simple dinner. We ate in the living room while watching some random show on TV. I tried to forget what happened. I felt my shoulders relax a bit. By the time we went to bed, I managed to convince myself it was nothing more than a freak incident. But that night, something else happened. It was around 1:30 in the morning when I got up to use the bathroom. The hallway was dark, but enough moonlight came through the window to guide me as I passed the living room. I saw movement near the couch. It was quick, almost too fast to notice. My chest tightened and I froze in place, focusing on that spot. The couch was barely visible, a dark shape against the wall. My eyes adjusted and I didn't see anything else. I took another step and for a moment I thought I heard a faint scuff on the floor. It sounded like a shoe sliding. I shined the flashlight around my hand, shaking a bit. Nothing stood there. The living room was empty, just like before. I stared for a few seconds, waiting to catch any further sound or movement. My breathing got faster and I felt a surge of adrenaline, but I didn't see anything. I finally walked to the bathroom, closed the door and turned on the light. I looked at myself in the mirror. My eyes were wide, my hair messy, and my forehead slick with sweat. I splashed some water on my face, trying to calm down after I finished. I walked back to the bedroom, stepping carefully, listening for anything. Everything was silent. I slid back into bed. My wife stirred a little but stayed asleep. I stared at the ceiling for a long time before I finally drifted off again. Over the next few days, small things happened that kept me on edge. One afternoon, I was in the kitchen making a sandwich. The TV in the living room turned on by itself. I heard voices coming from it, so I rushed over and found the screen lit up. I turned it off, checked the remote, and it was on the coffee table, untouched. I shrugged it off as a malfunction, but I felt a chill on the back of my neck. Another time I was in the bathroom and thought I heard a faint knock on the door. When I opened it, nobody was there. My wife was in the backyard, watering her plants. I tried to gather the courage to talk about this with her in detail, but I didn't want to sound paranoid. Each event by itself could have a logical explanation. A glitch in the TV, a random noise in the pipes, or me just being jumpy. But I kept remembering that night how real it felt when the mattress sank one evening. I decided to set up an old phone as a makeshift camera in our bedroom. I placed it on a tall dresser angled toward the bed. I wanted to see if anything happened during the night. My wife noticed but didn't object. I told her I just wanted peace of mind. She sighed and said, "If it helped me feel better, fine." We both went to bed around 11. I was tired, but I stayed awake for a while, staring at the ceiling. I listened to the house, the soft hum of the fridge from the kitchen, a distant dog barking outside, the low rumble of a car passing by on the street. Eventually, my eyelids got heavy and I fell asleep. I woke up. Suddenly, a few hours later, the room felt stuffy. I looked over at the clock on the nightstand and it said 2:42 a.m. I listened and heard a faint click sound near the bedroom door. It was a short metallic click. I didn't see anything move, but I sat up, reaching for the lamp. I flicked it on and the light spread through the room. My wife stirred, but she didn't fully wake up. I scanned the room, focusing on the door. It was closed, just like we left it then. Without warning, the lamp flickered. Once it didn't turn off, it just dimmed and then went back to normal brightness. My heart rate shot up. I slid out of bed, walked over to the dresser and grabbed the phone. I wanted to check if it recorded anything. My hands shook as I navigated through the video. I scrolled through the footage, quickly scanning for unusual movement. The phone's microphone picked up our soft breathing. Nothing else. At some point, there was a subtle shift in the frame, like the phone itself got bumped. There was no reason for that. Then after about 5 seconds, the image seemed to blur for an instant, as if the camera lost focus. In that blur, I thought I saw a vague outline near the foot of the bed. My stomach churned. The outline was too faint to be sure. Right then, the lamp flickered in real life again. I dropped the phone onto the dresser. My wife woke up confused. She asked what was going on. I stuttered that the lamp was acting weird and something messed with the camera. She sat up, rubbed her eyes, and told me to calm down. I could feel my body shaking and my mouth was dry. I picked up the phone again to show her the part of the video she watched, but she said she couldn't see anything definite. She saw the blur, but it could have been a focus issue. I nodded, but I still felt uneasy. We ended up turning off the lamp and relying on the small nightlight again. My wife went back to sleep, but I spent another hour awake, listening to every small sound in the house. Eventually, I dozed off from exhaustion. The next morning, I woke up with a headache and felt groggy. I checked the phone again, but there was nothing. Nothing more conclusive. Over the next week, the strange events continued, but never in front of my wife. Whenever I was alone in a room, I'd catch a flicker at the edge of my vision, or an object would seem slightly out of place twice. The door to our bedroom opened on its own when I walked past. Each time the doorknob turned as if someone twisted it from the inside, but the room was empty. My wife and I talked about having an electrician come check the wiring. She also suggested I see someone about my stress level. I didn't argue, but I wasn't convinced this was just stress or faulty wiring. I decided to be honest with her. We sat down in the living room one evening. I told her I felt like we weren't alone in the house. Sometimes she looked uneasy but tried to be supportive. She promised to keep an eye out for anything unusual. I appreciated that we agreed to stay calm and gather more evidence if possible. That night I tried to relax. I took a hot shower, then crawled into bed. My wife was reading a book and she turned off the light. A few minutes later, we lay there in silence. Just the two of us in the dark. I thought I might drift off without incident. But around 3:00 in the morning, I felt movement near the foot of the bed again. I froze, my breathing went shallow. My skin prickled with goosebumps. I looked down, and in the dim glow, I swear I saw that shape again. It was sitting on the bed, its outer line dark and blurry. I couldn't see any features, just a human-sized silhouette. I reached out to tap my wife's arm. She stirred, then opened her eyes. Right at that moment, the shape rose and vanished just like before. She said she saw nothing but felt the bed shift. She clutched my hand, and I could tell she was scared. I sat up, turned on the lamp, and we both stared at the spot. It was empty. The sheets looked normal, no indentation, no footprints. My wife looked at me with wide eyes and whispered, "I felt the bed move." I swear I did. We didn't sleep for the rest of the night. We sat up together, hearts racing, watching every corner of the room. The house stayed silent. When morning finally came, we got up in a daze. We talked about calling someone for help, maybe a professional who deals with unexplained stuff. We haven't decided yet. All I know is, ever since that first night when the mattress sank at my feet, I've felt this constant tension in my chest. It's like I'm waiting for the next time it appears, and I have no idea how to make it stop. I remember the first night I noticed something was off. I was sitting in my living room looking out my front window at the old cemetery across the street. It was around 11:00, and the wind was rattling the thin wire fence that circles the property. A few crooked headstones were visible under the faint light of a street lamp. I stared for a moment, feeling like I should close my curtains and ignore the place altogether, but I kept looking. I had moved into this house a few weeks earlier. The neighborhood looked normal enough during the day: clean sidewalks, a small corner store, and friendly neighbors who mostly kept to themselves at night. Though the cemetery took on a different presence. The tall gates on either side were rusted, and the wire fence between them had large gaps in some areas more than once. I'd found small animals skittering around it, searching for holes big enough to crawl through. The caretaker sometimes came by in the evening to clear debris or do quick repairs, but I hardly ever saw him on that first night. I was on the couch, leaning forward, elbows on my knees. Outside, I thought I saw a dark figure moving between the tallest headstones. My living room lights were off, so I didn't think it could be a reflection. It looked like a person in a black coat or maybe a robe. My eyes strained to see any details. I grabbed a small flashlight from my coffee table and flicked it on. Its beam cut across the street and landed on the cemetery fence. The figure was gone. My heart pounded. I pressed my face closer to the glass, trying to catch any sign of movement. Nothing. The wind died down for a moment, and the only sound was my own breathing. I exhaled, feeling my shoulders tighten. I told myself it was just an illusion caused by shadows and bad lighting. I pushed the flashlight aside and went to bed, trying not to think about it. The next morning, I stepped onto my porch to drink a cup of coffee. The cemetery looked ordinary in daylight. Some of the stones were cracked, but others were in good shape. A few had marble surfaces, though the inscriptions were faded. I could see the caretaker near the back, rummaging through a small metal shed. He didn't look up, and I decided not to bother him. I finished my coffee and brushed off my unease from the night before, however. As the days passed, I kept seeing strange shapes out of the corner of my eye whenever I glanced toward those headstones. After dark one night, I was in my driveway unloading groceries. My trunk was open, and I was lifting bags out when I heard a soft rustling coming from across the street. It sounded like footsteps on dry leaves. I turned around and watched the fence. I couldn't see anything, but the sound continued. I stood there, grocery bags in both hands, heart hammering against my rib cage. The footsteps grew quicker, but I still saw no one. Then they stopped. I waited a few more seconds before hurrying inside. I tried to settle down in my kitchen. I flipped on the overhead light, set my groceries on the counter, and gulped half a bottle of water in one go. My palms were sweaty. I wanted to believe it was a stray cat or something normal like that. But I'd never heard a cat produce footsteps so clearly. I forced the thought out of my mind and focused on making dinner. Later that night, I decided I should take a closer look at the cemetery. It felt like a terrible idea, but I was tired of feeling jumpy every time a branch snapped or the wind blew. So I waited until about 11 again, grabbed my flashlight, and walked across the street. My heart was pumping fast, and I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. The wire fence was only waist-high near the entrance, but it got taller along the sides. I tested one of the gate doors, and it swung open with a creak. I took a single step inside. Dry gravel crunched under my shoes. The moon was out, though, partially hidden by clouds, so I had some light. I swept my flashlight across the rows of headstones. A few tree branches hung low, brushing the top of the fence, making a quiet scraping sound. I kept walking, passing a series of old markers. No sign of anyone. I stayed for maybe 5 minutes. My mouth was dry, and I felt my pulse thumping in my neck. I heard distant cars on the main road a few blocks away, but nothing else. Then a sudden thud echoed from somewhere. Behind a large tombstone, I jumped and pointed my flashlight in that direction. I saw nothing. I wanted to call out, but I wasn't sure who or what might answer. My heart pounded harder. I tried to swallow, but my throat felt constricted. I backed away, taking care not to trip over any loose rocks. The gate creaked again as I slipped out to the sidewalk. I stood there for a few seconds, catching my breath, and hurried into my house. Over the next week, it got worse. Almost every night I heard odd noises. Sometimes it was scraping, sometimes a low moan, which I tried to write off as the wind. The shapes in the darkness seemed bolder. They moved between the headstones, sometimes gliding across the open spaces, yet whenever I shined a light on them, they vanished. My sleep was restless. I started double-checking my locks and windows. I left a light on in my hallway at night. One evening, I was outside by the fence holding my flashlight through one of the gaps in the wire mesh. I was trying to see if there was anything in the far corner. The caretaker's shed was in that area, but I saw no lights. The air smelled of damp leaves, and the fence felt cool against my palms. That's when I heard it. My name spoken softly. It came from the other side of the fence. I froze. My flashlight pointed into the darkness. The voice sounded like my mother's voice, gentle but urgent. "Jordan," it asked. "My name is Jordan, so..." It was clear as day. My heartbeat slammed into my chest so hard that I gasped. "My mother lives 3 towns over. There's no reason for her to be in a dark cemetery at night." I pressed my face against the fence, trying to see who was there. I asked Mom. My voice came out shaky. No answer. I stood there, hands trembling, heart racing. I wanted to believe maybe she was visiting and decided to pull a prank. But she's never been one for surprises like that. Plus, I saw no silhouette, no person, nothing. I stepped back, almost stumbling on the curb. A cold sweat slid down my back. I turned on my heel and hurried inside my house. I locked the door, then I checked it again. My breathing was rapid, and I felt a cold tightness in my chest. After a few minutes, I found my phone and called my mother's number. She answered from her home, sounding sleepy. I asked if she had been anywhere near the cemetery tonight. She said no. Of course not. I told her I was just worried about something random. I didn't want to explain. We spoke for a minute or so. And then I hung up, still rattled for a few days. I avoided going out after dark. I'd come home from work, lock the door, and stay away from the windows, but the sounds continued and the shadows still moved one night. I was brushing my teeth in the bathroom, trying to calm my nerves and focus on my nightly routine. I spit into the sink and heard a muffled voice through the window. My bathroom faces the side of the house, so it has a partial view of the cemetery fence. I flicked off the bathroom light, hoping to see outside. When I peered through the glass, I saw something standing behind the fence. It was a dark shape, tall, motionless. I didn't hear the voice anymore, but I felt like the thing was looking right at me. My scalp tingled, my stomach twisted. I slowly lifted my phone and tried to record a video. But the shape faded into the darkness. It didn't move left or right. It just wasn't there anymore. I turned the light back on, feeling a jolt of fear in my gut. I slept poorly that night. My dreams were filled with the wire fence and the voice of my mother calling me closer. I woke up drenched in sweat, heart pounding the next day. I forced myself to talk to a neighbor named Paul who lives 2 houses down. I asked if he'd noticed anything strange at the cemetery. He shrugged, said he keeps his curtain shut at night, and that he heard the place can be creepy, but he never pays attention to it. His casual tone annoyed me, but I didn't press further. I walked back to my house feeling isolated, it seemed, like no one else was seeing or hearing what I was dealing with that afternoon. I saw the caretaker for the first time in days. He was dragging a wheelbarrow near the front gate. I hesitated, but I decided to ask if he'd noticed any trespassers at night. He gave me a puzzled look and said he locks the gates around sunset and hasn't seen anyone strange. I mentioned the shadows. He shrugged and pointed at the tall trees. They move around when it's windy. He said, his voice was flat. I didn't see any reason to push him further, so I left that night. I tried to keep myself busy. I watched TV, made dinner, and avoided looking out the window around 10. I sat on my couch with a soda in my hand. Flipping channels, the uneasy feeling in my chest wouldn't go away. I decided I was tired of being scared. I put on a jacket, grabbed my flashlight and phone, and walked outside. The street lamp across from my house buzzed quietly. The air felt thick. I marched straight to the fence, my fingers tingling with adrenaline. My plan was to stand there and see if I heard anything, then record it on my phone if it happened. I leaned against the wire, shining my light between the posts. My breath came in short bursts for a minute. It was dead quiet except for a soft breeze and the hum of the street lamp. Then I heard the voice again. Jordan. It was low, almost a whisper, but it was definitely my mother's voice. I nearly dropped the flashlight. The hair on my arm stood up. I pointed the beam wildly, trying to catch sight of anything. I called out. Who's there? My voice cracked. Silence. I felt a wave of terror tighten my stomach. My knees felt weak and my ears buzzed with the sound of my rushing pulse. I held up my phone and started recording, panning the camera across the fence. I whispered, "Say something," feeling a bit foolish. Then it spoke my name again, very close to the fence. I flinched and almost fell back. W. The phone's camera jerked, capturing nothing but a shaky shot of the fence. My eyes darted around. I still saw no figure, just rows of headstones in the weak glow of the streetlight. I backed away, panting. My chest felt like it was being squeezed by a vice. I turned off the camera and staggered back onto the sidewalk. My flashlight trembled in my hand. Then I realized I still had the phone's microphone on. I lifted it to my ear and played back the recording. At first I heard static, my own footsteps and my voice, then, faintly, the word Jordan. I gasped. I could hear it plain as day. I ran into my house, locked the door, and collapsed onto a dining chair. My heart wouldn't slow down. I replayed the clip 4 or 5 times, each time I heard that single word, my name, in my mother's voice. I couldn't explain it. The next morning I sent it to my mother. She listened and said it sounded like her. She was confused and uneasy, but she promised she wasn't pulling any kind of prank. I believed her. I spent that day researching what to do. I thought about contacting someone from the local authorities, but I had no proof of actual danger. Just a weird recording. I considered going to the caretaker again, but his lack of interest last time discouraged me. I left him alone. When darkness fell that evening, I decided to keep my lights on, all of them. I shot every blind. I tried to watch a movie, but I couldn't pay attention. At around midnight, I heard the wire fence rattle outside. My stomach flipped. I walked to my front window and peeked through a gap in the curtains. The fence was shaking a bit, as if someone was tugging on it. My flashlight was on the table by the door, but I felt too scared to go out there and check my phone. Suddenly lit up, the screen showed unknown number. My hand trembled as I answered. There was a faint static. Then I heard my mother's voice calling my name again. Jordan. My heart slammed inside my chest. I hung up immediately. Hands shaking, I dialed my mother's real number. She was at home. Half asleep, clueless about any call. I told her about the unknown call. She said her phone was next to her in bed, and she hadn't touched it that night. I barely slept over the next few days. I tried to ignore the voice. I played loud music in the house. I slept with earplugs. I avoided going outside after dark. But the final straw came when I stepped onto my porch one evening and found the fence torn in one spot. It looked like someone had cut through it with wire cutters. A small opening led into the cemetery. I flashed my light inside and saw fresh footprints in the dirt. They were large, but I couldn't tell much else. I wanted to call the caretaker or maybe the police. I wasn't sure how to explain the situation. Someone had cut the fence, but I didn't see anyone around. I was shaking so much I dropped my flashlight. It hit the concrete porch and rolled away. I grabbed my phone and snapped a few pictures of the damaged fence and footprints. Then I ran back inside, locked every door, and slid a chair under the doorknob. My heart was beating so fast I thought I'd pass out. My cheeks felt hot. I sat on the couch, phone in hand, listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator. I was ready to call the police if I heard anything else. Minutes turned into hours. I didn't hear my name. I didn't hear footsteps. Eventually, I realized I was so tense that my muscles ached. I forced myself to stand up, pick up my flashlight from the porch, and turn off the outside light. The fence was still broken, but I saw no MVE movement. My nerves were shot. I ended up calling a local handyman the next day and telling him I wanted a stronger fence around my property. He came out, gave me a quote, and said he could install something taller in front of the cemetery. I didn't mention the voice or the shadows. I just told him I wanted more privacy. That's where things stand now. I'm still living here for the moment. The new fence will go up soon, and I hope it helps me feel safer, but every night when I turn out the lights, I feel that cold grip of fear in my stomach. I keep imagining someone calling my name from the other side of the new fence. Sometimes I replay the recording on my phone just to confirm I didn't imagine it. It's there, my mother's voice whispering my name in the darkness. I don't know what I saw or heard in that cemetery, and I don't like thinking about it all. I can do is lock my doors, keep my flashlight close, and try to get through each night without hearing that voice again. So far, I haven't dared to step back inside the fence after dark, and honestly, I'm not sure I ever will. I want to start by saying that I never believed in strange events or ghost stories. I thought I understood how old apartments could have weird noises or stuck doors, but something happened in my new place that I can't ignore. I moved in about a month ago, and on the first night after changing the lighting in my bedroom, I noticed something I can't explain. When I turn on the new ceiling lights, the closet door behind me starts to open by itself. It's not a fast movement. It's slow, like it's pushing against a heavy hinge. The handle moves first, then the door creaks. I've tried to fix it with nails and extra screws, but it keeps happening. I want to tell you everything in detail because it still makes my hands shake when I talk about it. I live on the third floor of a building that's about 40 years old. The apartment feels sturdy, but it has some signs of age. The walls have a few cracks near the corners and the floor creaks in the hallway. The bedroom is the one room I decided to upgrade right away. I spent 2 days pulling out the old light fixture and installing a modern LED system. I'm not an expert, but I followed a step-by-step guide I found online. The new lights are bright and they spread an even glow around the room. I felt proud when I flipped the switch for the first time. That's when I heard the closet door click. It was a soft click like metal against wood. At first I thought the movement came from a draft in the hallway. I turned around and saw the door open about 2. And it wasn't wide open, it was just enough to see the dark interior of the closet and the row of coats I'd hung there. I closed it, checked the latch, and shrugged it off. Later that night I got ready for bed. I always switch off the bedroom lights before slipping under the covers. I didn't notice anything else. I didn't hear any other noises. I fell asleep without a problem, but I woke up around 3:00 a.m. and saw that the closet door was open again, just a few inches. I froze for a second and tried to calm my breathing. My heart was racing. I got up, walked over to the door, and shut it. I made sure it clicked. I even pulled it toward me a couple of times to confirm it was secure. It stayed closed, so I went back to bed. My hands felt sweaty, my throat was dry. I stayed awake for a while, listening for any noise. I eventually fell asleep again the next morning. I went to check the hinges. They looked fine. The screws were tight. The frame didn't have any major gaps. I opened and closed the door a few times. In daylight, it seemed normal. Then I turned on the new LED lights right away. I heard the door shift. It was a faint sound like a light scraping of wood. Then it opened another inch. I felt a jolt in my stomach. I walked around the closet and checked the inside. Nothing unusual was there, just my coats, a few boxes, and a spare suitcase. I tried pulling the door closed while the lights were on, but it started to push back. It was slight, but it was there. I held the handle in place. I even put my foot against the frame. I felt resistance, distance. It was like someone was nudging it from the inside my arm. Hair stood up and my breath came out in short bursts. I decided I should try a simple fix. I went to the toolbox in the kitchen and grabbed some nails. I hammered 3 nails through the frame into the door. I made sure they went deep enough to hold the door shut. I tested the door after each nail. There was no wiggle. It was solid. My neighbor might have heard me hammering, but I didn't care. I wanted to stop that door from opening. I stood there and flipped the light switch on and off a few times. The door stayed put. I felt a bit foolish, but also relieved. I thought maybe it was just some weird pressure issue in the room. I left the lights off and went about my day. That night I slept with a small lamp on in the living room. Just to have some comfort, I checked the closet door before climbing into bed. It was still sealed with the nails. I gave it a push, and it didn't move. I went to sleep feeling more at ease, but when I woke up in the morning, I saw that the door was half open. The nails were still there, but they had been pulled out of the wood just enough to free the door. I swear I felt my chest tighten. I had trouble breathing for a second. I stood in front of it, staring at those nails. They weren't bent. They were still straight, as if they'd been eased out of the wood. The door was open about a foot. I backed away and bumped into the bed. My legs felt weak. I didn't understand how it happened. I didn't hear anything during the night. I got dressed and left for work without touching the door. My mind was racing all day. I couldn't concentrate. I kept thinking about how nails don't just slide out of wood. Something had to pull them or push them or do something to loosen them. I wondered if I had hammered them incorrectly, but that didn't make sense. I tried to find a logical explanation. Maybe the door was warped and it popped the nails out. But that still seemed strange at lunch. I got a text from a coworker asking if I was okay because I seemed distracted. I told him I was just tired. I didn't feel like explaining the closet story after work. I grabbed some thicker screws and a power drill from a hardware store. I also bought some stronger brackets. When I got back to the apartment, I went straight to the bedroom. The door was still half open. I pulled it shut and installed 2 metal brackets on the outside, securing them to the door and the frame. I used 6 screws on each bracket. I tested them by pulling on the door with all my strength. It didn't budge. I switched the light on. The handle rattled a bit, but the brackets held. My heartbeat finally settled. I felt sweaty under my shirt. I took a quick shower, grabbed some leftovers from the fridge, and watched TV in the living room. I refused to go back into the bedroom until it was time to sleep around midnight. I turned off the TV and headed to the bedroom. I paused at the door. The room felt different. It felt cooler. The bracket was in place and the door was shut tight. I stepped inside and flipped the new LED lights on. For a second, I heard a soft creak from the closet door, but it didn't move. I turned the lights off and got into bed. I left the hallway light on. I was half asleep, lying on my side, when I heard a scraping noise. I rolled over and propped myself up on my elbow. My eyes locked on the closet door. It looked like it was vibrating. The brackets rattled. Then I heard a pop. It was a clear, sharp sound. The top bracket had pulled out of the wall, dropping screws on the floor. I jumped out of bed and switched on the ceiling lights. The door was moving again. It was slow and steady. The lower bracket squeaked, and then I heard another pop. That bracket flew off the door frame, leaving a piece of splintered wood. This door swung open, making a dragging sound against the carpet. I stood there, my heart pounding in my ears. I picked up a screwdriver and ran to the door. I grabbed the handle and tried to yank it shut. It wouldn't move. It felt like something pushed from inside. I kept pulling until I almost lost my balance. Then it stopped, resisting. The door slammed shut, almost catching my fingers. My shoulders were tense and my chest felt tight. I flipped the lights off and the door stayed shut. I didn't bother sleeping in that room. I grabbed a pillow and blanket and slept on the couch. In the morning, I went back to see if the damage was worse. In daylight, the frame had fresh splinters around the bracket holes. The door itself looked fine. The nails from before were still lying on the floor near the closet. I felt tired and a bit shaky. My mouth tasted bitter from anxiety. I decided to call an electrician to check the wiring, maybe some electrical surge or something else related to the new fixture was causing vibrations. I didn't tell him about the door. I just asked him to check the bedroom lights. He came in the afternoon and tested everything. The lights were installed correctly. He didn't find any unusual readings. He flipped them on and off a few times. The door didn't open. I stood there hoping it would stay still. It did as soon as the electrician left. I turned the lights on by myself. I heard the door creak and saw it open an inch. I walked up to it and pushed it closed, kept pushing back. I leaned on it with my shoulder. My heart was pounding so hard that I felt it in my neck. My mind was blank except for the thought that something was pushing that door. My hands shook as I turned the lights off again. The pressure vanished. I closed the door and stepped back. It stayed closed. I went to the living room and tried to calm down. I drank some water and stared at my phone, thinking about who else to call. I decided to check the building's basement for any structural problems. There's a small storage area there, plus some old plans on the wall near the breaker box. I went down and spent an hour looking at pipes and support beams. I didn't see anything that looked dangerous. I felt more tense than ever, though my body was stiff and I was sweating a lot. The caretaker of the building asked if I needed help, but I didn't feel like explaining. I just said I was curious about the building's layout back in my apartment. I avoided the bedroom for most of the day. I tried to focus on normal tasks, washing dishes, organizing books, and vacuuming. I felt jumpy every time I heard a small sound around dinner time. I made a sandwich and sat in the kitchen staring at the closed bedroom door at the end of the hall. I kept telling myself to grow up and check it out properly, so I grabbed my phone and turned on the camera. I wanted to record what happens with the lights on. I walked into the bedroom, set up my phone on a chair facing the closet, and hit record. Then I flipped the switch. At first, nothing happened. I stood there for maybe 20 seconds and the door stayed shut. Then I heard a soft squeal. The door opened about an inch. I felt a rush of fear run through my body. My stomach tightened and my neck felt hot. I walked over, put my hand on the door and pushed it closed. It resisted. Then it gave in. I walked back to my phone and stopped recording. My breathing was unsteady and I wiped sweat from my forehead. I played back the video. It clearly showed the door opening on its own. I saved the footage but didn't know who to show it to. I knew people might laugh or act concerned. I got up, turned off the bedroom lights, and left the door as it was. I'm not sure if I want to keep fighting with it. I feel anxious just thinking about another night here. Part of me wants to move out, but I just bought this place. I can't afford to walk away. I have no idea what else to do. The door only opens when the ceiling lights are on. If I leave them off, the door stays shut for now. I'm using a small lamp at night and pretending everything is fine, but whenever I walk by that closet, I feel a tightness in my chest and a sinking feeling in my stomach. I can't think of a normal explanation for this. I've tried nails, screws, brackets, and an electrician. Nothing has fixed the issue tonight. I'm planning to sleep on the couch again. I locked the bedroom door from the outside, but that doesn't make me feel much better. It just feels like I'm delaying the problem. I don't know what will happen tomorrow. All I know is that every time those new lights go on, the closet door moves on its own and it won't stay shut no matter what I do. That's my story so far. I have no clear answers and my hands won't stop trembling when I talk about it. I'm hoping something changes soon. Otherwise, I'm going to lose my mind in this place I used to call my dream apartment. I had no idea the old carpet in my guest room hid a secret. I never thought lifting it up would lead to weeks of strange sounds and restless nights. But it did. I can't ignore it anymore, so I'll tell you everything. I moved into this house a few months ago. It was cheap and I liked the extra space. The place had been on the market for a while, so I expected some issues. The wooden floors creaked, some of the walls were scuffed, and the carpets in 2 rooms were worn out, but it was affordable and I wanted to fix it up at my own pace. The guest room had this ugly brown carpet with frayed edges and a few stains. One day after I finished repainting the living room, I decided to tackle that guest room. I figured I'd replace the carpet with something nicer. I pulled the bed away from the wall, unhooked a small dresser, and stacked a bunch of random boxes in the hallway. I used a utility knife to cut sections of the carpet so it would be easier to roll up and remove the smell of dust. Rose into the air every time I lifted a corner. My nose started itching and I had to sneeze a few times. I wore gloves because I hate touching old dusty stuff with my bare hands. After pulling up about half of the carpet, I noticed a small square outline on the floor. It caught my attention because the wooden planks around it were a slightly different color. I knelt down and felt around the edges. Sure enough, there was a hidden hatch or door of some kind. I tried to pry it up with my fingers, but it was stuck. I went to the garage and got a flathead screwdriver. I slipped the tip under one corner and pushed the door lifted. It was a little stuck, but after a bit more effort it came loose. I coughed when more dust sprang out. Then I opened the hatch all the way and I saw a dark hole with a narrow wooden staircase leading down. I had never heard about any secret basement or extra storage space when I bought the house. I felt uneasy, but I also felt curious. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam lit up the top steps, which were covered in more dust. I could see some cobwebs hanging off the edges. I took one careful step onto the first stair. It creaked under my weight, but it seemed solid enough. I moved slowly, shining the phone's light ahead of me. The space below was small and rectangular, with plain wooden walls and a concrete floor. The air felt stale. It reminded me of an attic, even though it was underground. A single wooden chair stood near the back wall facing the corner. The chair looked old and one of its legs was slightly crooked. I saw no other furniture, just that chair pointed toward the wall. I stepped closer until I stood about a foot away from it. There was dust on the seat and on the rails. My phone flashlight revealed some scratches on the floor around the chair's legs, like someone had moved it back and forth. But not recently. I listened for a moment. I could hear my own breathing and the slight hum of the air conditioner upstairs. I didn't hear anything else. In that small space, I didn't see any other doors or openings. The walls were plain, just rough wood. I felt a chill, but the temperature wasn't that low. It was just the thought of finding this strange hidden room with a single chair facing a corner that made my shoulders tense up. The hair on my arm stood on end. I didn't stay down there much longer. I backed away, climbed the stairs, and shut the hatch. My heart was beating fast, and I took a moment to calm down. Then I considered what to do next. I decided to leave the hatch alone for now. Put down new flooring and pretend it was a normal storage area. I didn't see any reason to explore it further. It was empty aside from that chair. I figured it was just some weird leftover from a previous owner. That night, I tried to sleep. My bedroom is on the other side of the house, so I didn't think about the guest room around 2:00 in the morning. I woke up to a faint noise. At first, I thought it was the wind or the pipes. I listened closely. It sounded like coughing. It was muffled, but it was definitely coughing. I sat up, turned on my bedside lamp, and listened again. The noise stopped. I told myself I might have dreamed it after a few minutes. I turned off the lamp and forced myself to go back to sleep the next day. I went about my usual routine. I went to work, came home, made dinner, and watched some TV around 10:00. I walked through the hallway and glanced into the guest room. I had left the carpet half removed, but the hatch was still closed. Nothing looked different. I shrugged it off and went to bed that night. Sometime after midnight, I woke up again. I heard a cough. It was soft but clear. It lasted for a couple of seconds, then stopped. I felt a knot in my stomach. I got up, turned on every light in the hallway, and stood outside the guest room door. I didn't hear anything. I went inside the guest room holding a flashlight. I stepped carefully over the exposed floorboards and tapped on the hatch with my foot. It sounded solid. I leaned down and tried to lift the hatch, but I paused. My heart was pounding in my chest and my hands were shaky. I realized I didn't actually want to open it in the middle of the night. The cough had sounded real, and the idea of someone or something underneath the floor made my head spin. I told myself I was just imagining things. Maybe the old pipes made that noise. No. I went back to bed, but I didn't sleep well. Over the next few nights, I heard the cough at least 3 more times. It usually happened between midnight and 2 in the morning. It never lasted long. Maybe 1 or 2 short coughs, always muffled. I started waking up drenched in sweat. My throat felt dry. I started keeping a glass of water by my bed. I locked the guest room door at night, even though that felt silly, but I did it anyway. Hoping to calm my nerves one evening, I decided to investigate more thoroughly. It was still early, around 7:00, and there was plenty of daylight. Left, I grabbed a heavy flashlight from the garage and a folding knife just in case. Then I lifted the hatch in the guest room. My palms were clammy, but I forced myself to go down the stairs again. My flashlight beam lit up the space. The same chair was still there, facing the back corner. The air felt just as heavy as before. I walked around slowly, checking the walls for any cracks or hidden doors. I didn't find anything. I aimed the flashlight at the ceiling, looking for vents or holes. Nothing. I tapped on the walls. They sounded solid. I walked over to the chair, crouched down, and looked underneath it. There was dust and some old spider webs I didn't see. Footprints or any sign that someone had been there since I first discovered it. I left the space and double-checked that the hatch closed securely. I even tried to lock it with a makeshift latch. I fixed a small piece of metal to the underside of the hatch that would catch on a nail. I hammered into the floor frame. It wasn't perfect, but it made me feel better after that. I ate dinner, watched some TV, and went to bed. I slept okay that night, and I didn't hear anything unusual, but the next evening the coughing started again. This time it sounded a bit longer. I woke up with my heart pounding, stared at the darkness, and listened to short bursts of coughing. My mouth went dry. I reached for my phone and checked the time. It was about 100 in the morning. I got up and grabbed the flashlight I had left on my nightstand. I walked into the hallway, flipped on the lights, and heard one last cough. It stopped. The guest room door was still locked from the outside. I unlocked it, pushed it open, and flipped on the overhead light. Everything looked the same as before. The piece of carpet was still peeled back. The wooden hatch was still closed. I walked over, bent down, and checked my makeshift latch. It was still in place. I stood there breathing hard, trying to figure out an explanation. I began thinking about sleeping in the guest room. Maybe if I stayed there overnight, I could figure out exactly where the sound came from. So the following night, I set up a small inflatable mattress on the guest room floor. I left the overhead light off, but I plugged in a nightlight in one of the outlets near the door. I lay there with the flashlight beside me. The silence felt loud. Every time the house creaked or the air conditioner clicked, I jumped. My eyes kept drifting to the hatch. I had stuffed some towels around the edges, hoping to block out any air or sound. I was wide awake. Around 1:30, I heard a single cough. It was low and soft, like someone coughing behind a closed door on another floor. I felt every muscle in my body tense. My throat went tight, and I realized I was holding my breath. I didn't move. I waited to see if it would happen again. After a few seconds, I heard another cough. That was it. 2 small coughs, no footsteps, no talking, no movement. I was sweating through my shirt. I clicked on the flashlight, sat up, and AED'd it at the hatch. The towels were still in place. I checked around the room. Nothing else looked strange. I got on my knees and pressed my ear to the floor right over the hatch. I weighted my ear almost against the wood. My heart was pounding so loudly I could hear my pulse in my ears. I stayed like that for maybe 5 minutes. No more coughing. No more sounds. Eventually, I lay back down, but I didn't sleep until the sun rose over the next week. The coughs continued. They happened about every other night. The pattern was random. Sometimes it was just one cough, other times it was several, always muffled. I considered the possibility of an animal, but it sounded human. I installed a small motion sensor camera in the guest room, aiming it at the hatch. I set it to record all night. I hoped that if someone was coming up through the hatch, I'd see it. But every morning I reviewed the footage and found nothing. The latch never moved. The hatch never opened. I started feeling uneasy in my own home. I felt a nervous flutter in my stomach. Whenever nighttime approached, I avoided the guest room except when I needed to check the camera. I kept that door locked most of the time. On the nights when the cough came back, I tossed and turned for hours. My sleep schedule was shot. I started drinking coffee like water just to stay alert during the day. My coworkers asked if I was okay, and I just told them I had trouble sleeping one day. I thought about removing the chair from the hidden room. Maybe it had something to do with the weird noises. I couldn't think of a logical reason. But I was desperate. That evening I unlocked the guest room, opened the hatch, and went down the stairs again. The air smelled stale. I walked straight to the chair, grabbed it, and lifted it. It wasn't heavy, but I had to tilt it sideways to fit it through the narrow staircase. Then I carried it up and out into my backyard. I tossed it next to the trash bins. The seat had left a clean mark in the dust on the floor below. I saw a few more scratches under where it had sat, but nothing else stood out. I locked the hatch again and closed up the guest room. That night I stayed awake, half expecting the coughing to stop, but it didn't. I heard it around 1 in the morning. Just like before, it sounded the same. I took a week off from my usual home improvement projects because I felt drained. The cough never stopped. It came every night or every other night without fail. Sometimes it was so faint I barely caught it. Other times it sounded a little closer, but it was never loud. There was never a point where I heard footsteps or anything else. Just those short coughs like someone was clearing their throat yesterday. I tried to ignore it once more. I went to bed around 11 feeling exhausted. At about 1:30, I heard 2 coughs in a row. I woke up covered in sweat. I sat up in bed, rubbed my face, and felt my eyes stinging. I was tired of this routine. I got up, walked into the hallway, and stood there breathing heavily. I thought about barging into the guest room and ripping the hatch out of the floor, but that wouldn't solve anything. I realized I had no real plan. I just stood there staring at the closed guest room door, feeling the weight in my chest. I haven't called the police because there's no sign of trespassing. I can't exactly tell them I hear coughing under the floor. They'd probably think I was paranoid. I haven't told my neighbors or my friends. It sounds ridiculous. All I have is a weird hidden room. A chair that used to face the wall and some muffled coughing every night now. I've reached a point where I'm stuck. The cough is still happening. I haven't gone back down there in days. I keep the hatch latched and the towels around the edges. The camera never shows any movement. I'm writing all this out now because I need to let someone know. I didn't think I'd ever share this, but it's getting to me. I'm planning on sleeping in the guest room again tonight, camera rolling just to see if anything changes. I have no idea what's causing these noises or why they sound so much like a person. All I know is that I never should have lifted that damn carpet. If I had left it alone, I'd be sleeping through the night now. I keep waking up to the sound of a cough from somewhere down in that small empty space, and I have no clue how to make it go away.